This story occurred many years ago. It was probably the early 2000s at the time, and I was about 5 or 6 years old. The Thanksgiving tradition for my family is to go to my Uncle Rob and Aunt Carrie's house. They have a pretty nice place about 30 minutes away, and it's a middle point for lots of our family to meet. I remember that year we had a big family two-hand touch football game outside. It was really fun, but I was too young and too little to participate, so I stood around and watched with the rest of the family. As I was watching the game, my Uncle Rob's neighbor John came up to me and started talking with me. John would also be at our family get-togethers sometimes, because he would often just stop by and say hi, and then end up staying for a while. I didn't know much about him, but he always just seemed a little bit strange to me. He was probably in his 50s and had grayish hair and wore large glasses. He asked me several questions about football and who my favorite players were and stuff, and then talked with me about some other things. I remember then he asked me if I wanted to see his house. I didn't really want to, but he was really persuasive and kept telling me that I had to see it. So finally, I said okay, and then we got up and we walked back to the front of the house and then down the driveway. We walked down the street into his house, which was maybe a 10-minute walk away. When we got there, I saw his house, which was an older, more beat-up looking house. He let me in the front door, and the first thing I smelled was a strong, musty smell. The house was pretty messy, and I didn't really know what we were doing there. He told me to sit on the couch, so I did, and he turned on the TV. I remember watching football on TV for a little while he sat across from me in his chair. We did that for maybe 10 or 15 minutes until the front door suddenly opened. It was my Uncle Rob. He looked really surprised to see me and asked us what we were doing. John then stood up and told my Uncle Rob that I had been begging him to take me to his house. He said that I had to go back, and then I went back to Rob's. John stayed there. I really don't know why John invited me over to his house that day, but after that Thanksgiving, I never saw or heard anything about him again. I am a female 21-year-old college student, but this story occurred 2 years ago on Black Friday. I worked at a major retail store, and it was actually Thanksgiving night because we opened early for Black Friday. I was working a shift from 6 p.m. to midnight. I was mainly a cashier, but I also trained to work in electronics as well as fill in at manager when people went on breaks. When we opened, it was immediately very busy and the store was packed. It was my second time working a Black Friday, so I knew what to expect, but it was still pretty crazy. I spent most of the night as a cashier, ringing up customer after customer. When my shift was finally almost over at about 11 p.m., the store was still very busy, and the manager for our area needed to take a break, so I filled in during that time. I basically just overlooked the lanes, and usually didn't have to do a whole lot, so it was pretty easy. About 10 minutes into that, I saw a middle-aged man check out and buy a relatively large TV. After he checked out, he walked over to me and asked if I could help him. I asked him what I could do for him, and he then told me that he needed help getting the TV into his car. I said sure, and I followed him out of the store. He led me to his car, which was parked all the way at the end of the parking lot that still had quite a few cars in it. We arrived at his car, and he said he would open up the back. He had a pretty large SUV, and when I saw it I was relieved, because I was afraid he would be driving a tiny car where the TV wouldn't fit in it. He went towards the front of the car, and then I heard him drop his keys on the ground. He apologized to me and asked if he could borrow the flashlight on my phone to find his keys. I turned my phone to flashlight mode and then handed it to him. He then walked back over to the front of his car, picked up his keys, and unlocked it. He said it was open and I could go ahead and open the back, and then he would come around to help me. I opened it up and saw that he already had all of the seats removed in the back, so that would make the TV fit much better. He came over to the other side of the car across from me and lifted the TV with me out of the shopping cart and into the back of his car. Once it was in his car, he asked me if I could slide it all the way forward for him because he had a bad back. To do so, I had to get into the back of his car completely and push the TV forward. But as soon as my whole body was in the car, he slammed the trunk closed behind me. It really took me by surprise, It nearly gave me a heart attack. I turned around to see the man sort of smiling through the window. I figured it must have been a joke, but then I heard the trunk make the locking sound and saw the man start to walk over to the driver's door. He had one of those divider things, so I couldn't reach him in the front of the car. He then got in and started the engine. When he did, I tried the door anyways, but of course it was locked. I asked the man to let me out, but he ignored me completely and started slowly driving away. I looked around desperately to see if anybody had seen what had happened, but this area of the parking lot was poorly lit, and I couldn't see any people in the immediate area. I reached for my cell phone to call for help, but then I remembered that the man still had it. Thankfully, I still had my store walkie-talkie that we used to communicate throughout the store. I didn't know if it would still work at this long of a range, but I knew I had to try. The only problem was it made a really loud beeping noise when you spoke on it, so I turned the volume all the way down to mute so that the man wouldn't hear me, and I pushed down the button to speak. I whispered that I was in trouble and I was in the back of a gray SUV. I couldn't listen back for a response because the walkie was very loud and the man surely would have heard it, so I had to mute it after I spoke. I could only hope that somebody in the store heard me and took me seriously. The man, meanwhile, just kept driving the car and ignoring me the whole time, aside from telling me once that if I did anything crazy or stupid, something bad would happen to me. I just sat in the back of the car as far away from the man as I could and wondered what he was planning to do. We drove down a pretty busy road for a while, probably 10 to 15 minutes, and then turned off to a more quieter one. I was beginning to lose hope when out of nowhere I saw flashing lights behind us. I heard the man curse and he pulled to the side of the road. I was hoping the police would pull over as well, and sure enough they did. That was one of the best feelings of my life. The man was immediately arrested and I was let out of the truck. My call on the walkie had in fact worked, and one of the store workers had called the police. I was given the next 2 weeks off from work after the incident, and I haven't worked a Black Friday since. This is the scariest and craziest thing to ever happen to me, and it happened on Thanksgiving. It was when I was about 18 or 19 years old, and my family was hosting Thanksgiving at our house. I would say in total there was about 15 people there, mostly my cousins, aunts, and uncles. We had lots of food, and it seemed to be another great Thanksgiving. By about 9 p.m., a few people had left and gone home, and I was sitting on the couch watching football. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, the power in our house went completely out, and everything was pitch black. It was strange because it wasn't storming or anything. Then we started hearing these loud bangs at the front door. It was pretty frightening, and I slowly got up and left the room to look out the window to the front door. There were several men standing there right at the front door, wearing all black with ski masks. As soon as I saw this, I immediately jumped back. Then they started banging on the door once again. My dad went towards the door, and when he saw the men, he ran to go get his gun. The banging got louder, and then one of the men ran over to the window and started banging on it. The rest of the people at our house all started going upstairs, and I know I heard someone say they were calling the police. My dad came back down and showed his gun in the window and yelled out he was about to shoot them all. I thought he was crazy for doing that, but it ended up working. The men all ran away, and within another 5 minutes the cops had arrived. They stayed for a while, and eventually my dad was able to get our generator working, which restored our power for the night. It turns out they had cut one of our power lines. It made for a crazy Thanksgiving night. I've always gone out shopping on Black Friday for many years now. But 2 years ago was by far the scariest experience I've ever had. It was Thanksgiving Day, and I was excited to go buy a new TV. I was planning on going to Target for a big sale they were having on electronics, and they were opening at 6 p.m. on Thanksgiving night. I was at my parents' place, and they had over quite a few of our family members from my mom's side of the family. I chatted with all of them, and then had dinner with everyone. Then I left their house to Target to go buy a giant TV. I arrived at Target about 20 minutes before they opened. I saw that there was already a decent-sized line of people waiting to get inside. It wasn't too long though, and I figured I still had a decent chance of getting the TV I wanted. I got out of my car and went to the back of the line, and as I did, I saw a few other people get in line behind me. I waited in line for the remaining minutes until I saw the doors to Target being unlocked. I watched as people started to go inside, then I walked quickly with everyone else, and once I got inside, I made a beeline for the electronics department. The store was really crowded, and it was hard to get through everyone, but I was able to make it there in a few minutes without running into anyone or anything like that. I got to the TVs to see a few people had already grabbed the size and brand that I had wanted, which was 50 inches. I walked quickly over to them, and just as I did, I saw another person grab one to reveal that there was just one more left behind it. I quickly reached out and got the last one. I was so happy to actually have it in my hands, because I had been pretty nervous I wouldn't be able to get it. I knew how quickly they would sell out. Probably 2 or 3 seconds after I had gained full control of it, someone came from my right side and grabbed the TV that I had in my arms. It started to come out of my hands until I grabbed it and pulled it back. At that point, the person shoved me a little bit and I almost gave up the TV. I turned and saw a man wearing a blue coat and a slight beard. He was looking at me, and as we made eye contact, he said that I had his TV. I said sorry to the man, but I had gotten the last one. The man started to turn and walk away, but then did a 360 turn and came back to me. He then asked me if I could please give it to him. I really didn't want to, and I said no, I'm sorry. He then told me how he would have got to the TV sooner, but somebody had gotten in his way. Then he added he thought he had got to the TV before me as well. I knew the man was behind me, and I had got to it before him. He had tried to take it out of my hands after I already had it. I didn't want to cause a scene, but I wasn't going to give up the last TV to him, so I told him sorry one last time and started towards the check lanes. The man followed me all the way there, trying to reason with me. The more we walked, the angrier he became. It came to the point where I just started to ignore him. I finally got to the check lane, and he cursed at me and walked away. I checked out and walked my TV to my car in the parking lot and loaded it up. But as I was putting my TV in my car, I saw the man start to approach me once again. This time I got a bad feeling. It was a different environment out in the parking lot where there were less people around. I hurried up as fast as I could and then shut the door. The man was standing there from about 20 feet away, flipping me off. Then he got into a car that was parked nearby. I ignored him, and I actually felt kind of bad for the guy because I knew how great of a deal I was getting on the TV, but I also knew I didn't owe it to him to give him the last one. I started up my car and began to drive away. I drove back to my house to drop off the TV. My house was close to the Target, as well as my parents' house. As I turned onto my street, I noticed a car turn behind me. Then, as I was pulling into my driveway, I saw the car stop in front of my driveway. I got a terrible feeling. The car then started to honk. I looked and saw the man from Target yelling something out his window. Then he sped away in his car. I was glad he was gone, but I was a little concerned that he now knew where I lived. The man seemed to be a little crazy to get so worked up over a TV. I brought my TV in the house. Then I locked it up and went back to my parents for the rest of Thanksgiving. I stayed there until about 10 p.m., then drove back to my place. When I got there, I just felt suspicious. I was worried the guy had tried to break into my house or something when I was gone, but I figured I was just being paranoid. I looked around from my car at my place, and everything seemed fine, so I got out and headed for the front door. But as I made it to about 10 feet from my door, I noticed something. I had a couple of pillars in front of my house, and behind the side of the right pillar, I saw what appeared to be an arm. I knew who it had to be. I wanted to run away, but didn't want to make it obvious. I quickly stopped in my tracks, but said, "Forgot my phone," to myself. I was hoping this would work. Then I turned around and started walking back to my car calmly. The man seemed to buy it, and I wanted badly to run to my car, but I decided to remain calm. I didn't hear or notice the man moving at all, but when I reached about 10 feet from my car, I couldn't take it anymore. I broke into a sprint and ran the rest of the way. As I had reached my car, I heard the man now running after me. I got inside quickly and drove away as fast as I could. As I did, I felt something hit the car. It seemed like a rock. I drove back to my parents' place and told them everything. There was a decent-sized dent in the side of my car. I stayed there for the night and we called the police as well. However, I don't believe the man was ever caught, but at least I never did hear from him again. This happened just last year. It was Thanksgiving. The family gathering was at my aunt and uncle's. My wife and I live across town, about 20 minutes away from their house. It's a pretty nice place, and we were there hanging out with family and had a turkey dinner. We were planning to go Black Friday shopping early the next morning, so at about 9 p.m. we left to go home. We said our goodbyes and then walked out of the house into the driveway. They had a pretty big driveway. It was big enough for everybody's car to fit in it. When we backed out though, we noticed that there was a car parked on the side of the road right in front. Now this was a little bit strange, because it was a dirt road and not all that wide. I remember I even made a comment to my wife about it as we backed out. Right when we had gotten into the street, we noticed the lights to the car turn on and the engine start up. It was a smaller looking car that seemed to be dark in color. When we drove off down the street, the car drove behind us. Like I said, it took about 20 minutes to get back home, and there were a number of turns and different roads to go on. The entire drive, the car stayed behind us. We were wondering who this could be. Was it somebody we knew? I didn't think so. I didn't recognize the car, plus, why would they follow us home without letting us know? But who would do this? We got all the way back home, and I pulled into our driveway. The car did the same, but stopped at the far end. Now I was kind of concerned by this. I got out of the car and looked down to the car at the end of the driveway. I could see inside of it for the first time, and there appeared to be a man in the driver's seat. When I was standing in the driveway facing him, the guy shut off his car and got out as well. I saw he was sort of skinny, wearing a red shirt, black pants, and a hat. He immediately started yelling at me and seemed really angry, but I really couldn't tell exactly what he was saying. It seemed like he was just kind of yelling stuff. I asked the guy what he wanted, but he really didn't answer. He just kept yelling. He was standing by his car for the most part, but took a couple of steps closer to me. I warned the guy that I was going to call the police. At first, he didn't seem to care, but within a few seconds, he stopped and then got back inside of his car and started the engine. My wife and I walked inside after that as we saw him driving away. We both got inside, but no more than 5 minutes later, there was a banging at the front door. It was loud and aggressive. I looked out the front window and saw that the same guy was now back. I surely was not going to open the door to him. He kept banging on the door and then tried opening it. I didn't hesitate and called 911. The man was persistent and kept banging on the door and trying to open it, and eventually he moved to the back of the house and started banging on random windows. He also tried getting in the back door, which also was locked, thankfully. I was getting concerned that he would be able to break in until finally the police arrived. They were able to find the man pretty quickly. I never knew where the guy came from though, why he followed us home, or what he wanted. Last year, I got up really early and went Black Friday shopping for the first time ever. I've seen many things over the years about how crazy it is, and I have actually shopped on Black Friday before, but never early in the morning. But last year, there were some deals on TVs at Walmart, and I happened to be in the market for a new one for my bedroom. The deals seemed too good to pass up, but I also knew that they would probably sell out rather quickly. So I got up early on the morning of Black Friday and drove to my local Walmart, which opened at 5 a.m. It was still dark out, obviously, and I parked in the back of the full parking lot and walked up to see a line of people had formed waiting to get inside. I went to the back of the line, as it was like 4:55 a.m. or something like that. The line was not outrageously long, so I did have a good feeling that I would be able to get what I wanted. Within a few minutes of being in line, at least 20 people got in line behind me. I felt glad that I got there when I did. Then, I saw the line start to move and realized that the store must have been open for business. I made it inside a short time later, and the whole store was already packed. There were either customers or employees everywhere. I went as fast as I could to the electronics section, which seemed to be where just about everybody else was going. When I got there, I saw people putting things in their carts and others grabbing TVs. I went over, found the one I wanted, and grabbed it. There were only a few left. Once I had it in my arms, it was a great feeling because I'm sure they sold out within minutes. I went to the front and checked out. It took probably 20 minutes to do so because of how busy it was in there. And after that, I got out of the store and was going back to my car. I had a cart for my TV
and I made it within probably 50 feet of my vehicle when I noticed a man laying on the ground like 10 feet away from my car. He had crutches, and one he was laying on with the other about 10 feet away from him. When I got close to him, he looked at me, and I asked the guy if he was okay. The guy said he had fallen and asked if I could help him up. I left my cart next to my car and walked over to help the guy up. When I reached my hand out to him, he was struggling to get to his feet. Then I heard a noise behind me. I turned around to see somebody take my cart and start running away with it with my TV still inside. The guy in the crutches then sprung to his feet, grabbed the other crutch off the ground, and began running away. I had been set up. I couldn't believe this, and I was furious. I chased after the guy who had my cart. He and the guy who was pretending to be injured ran in the same direction towards another car. There was an SUV with the back of it already open, where the men jumped into it, shut the door, and then sped off. I was so mad, and also couldn't believe that people would do this. It was a big hassle, but I was able to get another TV without extra charge from Walmart. But I would like to warn everybody from my experience to be careful when you're out shopping on Black Friday.
This story happened back when I was 19, my brother was 16, and my sister was 14. That year, like most other years, we went to my uncle's house for Thanksgiving. It was a tradition, and we would be there for most of the day. We'd leave our house sometime in the early afternoon, and then at my uncle's we would have turkey and watch football. A decent number of other people from my family would be there as well. There was lots of food, but we would eat really early at like 4 p.m. So I remember that night, after we left my uncle's house at about 9 p.m., my brother and I asked our parents to stop at McDonald's and get some food. Luckily, McDonald's was open, because I don't think many other places were. My brother and I were starving, being active, growing young men, and having not eaten for over 3 hours. My dad pulled into the parking lot and parked. It was near a shopping area, which was pretty busy now. Some stores were nearby, and a few of them had already opened for Black Friday shopping. My brother and I walked inside, and my parents and sister stayed in the car, saying that they didn't want anything. We saw that there was a decent amount of other people inside of the McDonald's. It wasn't packed, but busier than we expected. Soon we ordered the food and then stood around waiting. We were standing out of the way, kind of on the side, and out of nowhere, this guy came up to us. He had a gross beard that was messy, and the man overall looked somewhat disheveled. He stood right by me and didn't say anything to me at all. It was really weird, so I moved away a few steps. The man then moved closer. My brother and I then moved to the whole other side of the restaurant. At first, the man did not follow, but after like 10 seconds, he came over to us and just stopped there. Finally, we heard our number being called, and we walked up and got the food. Then we headed to the exit. The man walked faster than us and stood in front of the doors, blocking them. We didn't know what this guy's problem was. We stopped and asked him to move. He didn't and ignored us. My brother asked him what his problem was, and the man still said nothing. I moved past him, slightly bumping the guy, but I was able to get around him. As I did, I told him to leave us alone. The guy then started walking behind us as we left the restaurant. My dad had parked our car in sort of the back corner of the parking lot. It was the only car in that particular area. When the guy saw us headed there, he took off and started sprinting past us. We were hoping that he would run away out of the parking lot, but instead, the guy stopped right in front of our car. My brother and I realized that we couldn't go there anymore. We saw the man start to knock on my dad's window. My brother and I were standing just a few feet in the parking lot. I called my dad on the phone and told him to drive to the Walmart parking lot and meet us there by the entrance doors. I told him that the guy seemed to be crazy. Then, my brother and I took off running and went out of the parking lot towards Walmart. It was a short distance away and would only take maybe 2 or 3 minutes to run there. My brother and I were pretty fast and made it there all right. The guy didn't chase us either. My dad drove away from the weird guy, and I'm not sure where he ended up going, but my parents and sister soon arrived at the Walmart. We got inside the car, and the man was nowhere in sight. After that, we were able to drive home safely. I'm not sure what that guy's problem was. I would guess he was on drugs or something, but he just wouldn't leave us alone. I'm glad that we were able to get away from him. I am a 25-year-old guy. A few Thanksgivings back, when I was still in college, my family was hosting Thanksgiving at our house like we always did. Typically, about 15 to 20 family members would all come over to our house. Before dinner, we hung out, had football on the TV, and had some snacks out. My older sister had just recently got engaged to her now husband Mark, and I've always been a bit of an amateur photographer, so the three of us went outside to take some photos. It was a perfect day and time for photographs because it had just begun to lightly snow and the sun was sort of peeking out of the clouds. It looked pretty cool. We went out to our backyard, which was fairly large. There was several acres of land back there with a shed and a pretty big woods. We went to the entrance of the woods, which was kind of our family photo spot, and I began taking pictures of them. We went to several other places in the yard and were outside for about 20 minutes and then came back inside. We looked over the photos briefly, and then it was time for dinner, where we had turkey and potatoes and all that good stuff. A little later that night, when we were all relaxing and watching some football, we decided to go over the photos again with a couple of my aunts to see. I have to admit that most of the photos were really good, but when we got to the ones in front of the woods, we noticed something. In 3 photos, in the window of the shed in the background, we could see what appeared to be a man's face looking at the camera. We had completely missed this the first couple times we had looked. It was a pretty creepy sight to see, and my sister couldn't believe it. We weren't able to make out much details of the man because of how far away he was, but we could only see his head in the window. We showed the pictures to my dad, who decided to go out to the shed with 2 of my uncles. They were all pretty large men, and said they were confident they could take whoever it was, but we still didn't know who the man was or if he was dangerous or not. We also didn't know if he would still be in the shed. Many of us watched from the window as my dad and 2 uncles walked out of our house towards the shed. When they got there, they opened the door, and I saw all 3 of them go inside. Then we saw briefly a man run out and try to hit one of my uncles, but was soon overpowered and shoved back into the shed. My dad and uncles then shut the door and all stood in front of it to block it. They signaled to us that the man was still in fact inside and yelled for us to call the police while they held the door shut so the man couldn't escape. My aunt had already called the police, and about 5 minutes later, they showed up and arrested the man. He was a dirty-looking guy who for some reason had wandered into our yard and decided to live in our shed for a whole 2 days. It made for a very memorable Thanksgiving. This happened on Black Friday about 5 years ago. I was a young 19-year-old woman in my second year of college. I lived pretty close to my school, so I was able to work at a nearby clothing store which was in a pretty big shopping center. I was scheduled to work on Black Friday, which I had done the year before. I knew it would be a long shift and really busy, but I also knew I was getting paid extra, so it was worth it. I got to work early on the morning of Black Friday. We opened at 6 a.m. and I was there. The store I worked at was pretty big, so we had a lot of people working. I was mainly a cashier, but I would also do other tasks as well. As I was working at the cash register shortly after we opened, a man came and checked out in my line. He was middle-aged and bald, and I remember he had a missing tooth in the front. As he was standing there, I could feel him just staring at me the whole time. Then he complimented me on my outfit and seemed to give off a bit of a creepy feeling, but I was nice to him and knew it was just part of the job. After that, he left. About an hour later, I moved from cashier to working in the women's department. As I was folding some clothes, I noticed the man once again. We were pretty busy, not enough where people were lined up outside or anything, but we were much busier than any other day. So I found it strange how I saw the same man once again about an hour later. But the part that I really didn't like is how I caught him just staring at me once again. When we made eye contact, he quickly looked away. It was as if he was almost hiding behind a rack of clothes. I did my best to mind my own business, and eventually the man was gone. About 10 minutes later, the man came back. I was still folding clothes and in the same area, but this time the man actually approached me. He asked me what I was doing after work. I didn't really give him an answer, I just said I don't know. He then asked if I would go with him. I told him no, sorry, and then he grabbed onto my arm. He said we should just leave.
This really took me by surprise, and I kind of yelled a little bit. I told him to stop grabbing me. At that point, there were a few people that noticed, and the man let go of me. He then walked away really fast. After that, I told a coworker, but the man was nowhere to be seen, so I thought he would be gone for good. But later on, probably 5 hours later, I saw him again, and he was staring at me. I was sure by now that the man was stalking me or something, and I was kind of concerned he would follow me when I left. I was getting off in about an hour, and I just hoped I wouldn't see the man when I was done. And I didn't, until 10 minutes before I was off when I noticed him. I got a coworker to walk out to my car with me. The man didn't follow me, which was a huge relief, and I drove home. I got home, and thankfully the man didn't follow me. However, that night, I was awoken to a knocking at my front door. I lived with my parents at the time, but I knew it wasn't them or my younger brother because they were all asleep. I laid there confused at first, until I remembered the man who had been stalking me at the store. Then I got a really creepy feeling. I didn't want to get up or even look out the window. Thankfully, I heard the sound of my brother leaving his bedroom. He said out loud he wondered who was knocking on the door at this hour as he walked. It was 2 a.m., and I guess my brother had still been up, most likely playing video games. I heard him get closer to the door, and at that point, I left my room to go over and join him in seeing who was there. As I did, my brother said to me there was nobody there. He then opened the door and stepped out. He looked around and picked up something off the ground, and then came back inside. Once inside, I saw he was holding an envelope. He opened it up and pulled out 2 Polaroid pictures. One of them was of my bedroom window, and the other was of the store that I worked at. When I realized this, I just about had a heart attack. I explained the man to my brother, and I'm 100% sure he's the one who left the envelope. We both woke up my parents, and the police were called. I ended up filling out a report and answering several questions. I got the next few weeks off work, and to my surprise, the next day the man was found at the store once again and caught.
It's a tradition for me to go Black Friday shopping every year with my best friend. We usually start at night on Thanksgiving and go for hours, sometimes all night. A few years back, we had several stores in mind that we wanted to go to. The first of which was a very large and popular store. We arrived shortly before they opened and saw a pretty decent sized line in front of the doors with tons of people waiting to get inside. When the store finally opened, people ran inside and packed the place. We walked inside and saw people literally everywhere, like a giant mob was running around the store. The most people were in the electronics section, but there were literally people everywhere. It was quite the sight to see. The store was getting pretty rowdy too. We witnessed 2 people get into an argument, as well as 2 other people shouting random things. We even saw a guy who was wearing a clown mask. All of that in the span of about 10 minutes. We went to go look at the things that we wanted, which were new Fitbits that were on sale. As we were looking at the Fitbits, we saw the guy in the clown mask walk over to us about 10 feet away and just stare at us. There were a lot of people between us, but we could see that he was directly looking at us, and if we moved a little bit, his head would move a little bit as well. We decided to get the Fitbits and then walk to another part of the electronics, and when we did, we noticed that the clown man seemed to be following us. He was wearing normal clothes, a sweatshirt and jeans, but the mask was one of the creepier ones that I had seen. We just ignored him the whole time and kept shopping, but he was starting to bother us with how obvious he was being that he was following us. My friend suggested that we go to the complete opposite end of the store, and so we did. The clown man followed us the whole way there too. It got really annoying, so I went up to him and asked him to stop following us. But when I did, he didn't seem to care at all. In fact, when I stepped closer towards him, he jumped away as if I was dangerous or something. By this point, we were ready to be done with that store and head to another one. We were kind of afraid that the clown mask guy would follow us out of the store, but figured he probably wouldn't. We checked out, which took us a while because of the long lines, and as we waited, the clown man stood at the end of the checkouts just staring at us. The store was so busy that none of the workers seemed to really notice or care. After all, there had been a near fight with some other people. Finally, when we were done checking out, We walked to the exits. When we got out the front door, the clown guy followed us right out. We decided to just keep ignoring him and walk to our car. He followed us all the way there, and when we arrived at the car, he stood about 20 feet back. Then an SUV pulled up to the clown man, and he got into the back seat. We were a little bit confused, but overall relieved to see him get into a car. That is, until we looked into the windows of the car he got into and saw at least 3 other people, all wearing different creepy clown masks, including the driver. We got into our vehicle as fast as we could and started it. Their SUV just sat in the middle of the parking lot lane with the engine running. As soon as we left, they followed. They followed us extremely close as we tried to leave the parking lot. Traffic was pretty busy because of Black Friday, and we knew we would have to try to lose them. They followed us right out of the parking lot. And down the road. We went towards another road that led to more stores, including a mall. We had to stop at a 4-way stop sign that had lines of cars at each direction. When it was our turn to go, we knew this was good because the clown would have to wait for their turn. But instead of waiting, they drove directly behind us and nearly caused an accident with multiple cars honking at them as they sped through the intersection. This really creeped us out to see the level of dedication they were taking just to follow us. But shortly after the both of us crossed the intersection, we heard a siren and saw flashing lights behind us. Luckily for us, a cop had been one of the cars in line at the intersection. We pulled over to the side of the road, but the clowns did not, and sped by us as well as the cops. We watched as the clowns drove forward for a good 10 to 15 seconds before finally pulling over and getting stopped by the police. We took this opportunity to turn around and drive the complete opposite direction. We didn't see those clowns again for the rest of the night.
A few years ago, I went Black Friday shopping. Originally, I had just planned on going to the mall on actual Black Friday in the morning with my mom. However, there were a couple of things on sale that I wanted to get people for Christmas gifts, and I thought they might sell out by the next day. I decided to go Black Friday shopping on my own on Thanksgiving night, and then go again with my mom the next day. My parents and I were at family's house for Thanksgiving, and after we got home, I left to go shopping at about 10 p.m. I went to the nearby shopping center that had pretty much all of the popular stores and restaurants. My plan was to go to Target, Best Buy, Walmart, and maybe a couple of other stores. Most of these were within a mile of each other or so. When I got to Target, I saw that it was very busy. There were people everywhere. I was able to navigate my way to the things that I wanted, but it took a while to get up to the checkout area and complete the purchase. I remember that among the crowd of people, I noticed this guy who had a really tall spiked mohawk, and the rest of his head was bald. It was hard to miss because he was also pretty tall. I finished shopping at Target and then went to Walmart. Now, Walmart was just as busy, if not busier, than Target was. I once again went through the crowd of people through the store to find the items that I wanted. As I was near the back end of the store, I happened to notice the Mohawk guy again. I found this interesting, but a coincidence. There were a lot of stores in the area, so it wouldn't be strange at all to see some of the same people at different ones. After I was at Walmart, I went to Best Buy. This store, like the others, was crowded and people were everywhere. And within probably 10 minutes of being inside, I saw the guy with the Mohawk here as well. I was over by the laptops and computers, which was at the right side of the store, and he was maybe 30 feet away in the same area. I noticed that he was looking at me. Maybe he recognized me from the same 3 stores and thought it was a coincidence too. But when I looked over at him, he looked away quickly and sort of went out of sight. I got kind of suspicious and decided to go to the far opposite end of the store. For the first time that night, I was really paying attention to my surroundings and not just to finding things that I wanted to buy. I was way over near the appliances now, like refrigerators and those kind of things. This side of the store was significantly less crowded than the other side. Within a minute of being on that side, the guy with the Mohawk showed up. I tried to pay attention to him without making it obvious. He didn't seem to be there with anybody and was just kind of standing around. I was getting more and more paranoid every second. I walked back towards the laptops again at the other end of the store. Once again, the man went to the area. He was even farther away this time, but he was still there. I would lose him in the crowd for a few seconds, but always saw him again with his distinct hair. Had he been following me the entire night? I wondered if that was the case, and if so, when he started following me. At that point, I'd gotten most of the things that I went out to get, and it was just after midnight. I wanted to go shopping with my mom the next morning, so I decided to call it a night. I checked out at Best Buy and then left the store. I parked at the back of the parking lot because of how busy it was, and when I was walking to my car and was about halfway there, I looked behind me. I saw the guy with the Mohawk was now leaving the store. I walked faster and got to my car and then locked the doors. I felt much safer now and started driving home. There were a lot of other cars out, and it took me a few seconds to exit the parking lot. When I finally made it onto a road, the second I turned, I saw an older-looking pickup truck pull out right behind me. In my mirror, I immediately noticed the hair. It was the same guy, and he was now following me in his truck. I had a terrible feeling. I really didn't know what to do. I continued to drive home, which was maybe a 10-minute drive. As I was driving, the guy was following me at a pretty close distance in his truck. I took out my phone and called my mom. Thankfully, she was still awake. I told her that some guy was following me in his truck and I didn't know what to do. My dad was still awake too, and he was also listening. He got on the phone and told me not to drive home, but gave me a location sort of near our house and told me to drive around that area. He then said he was getting in his truck and leaving. I did what he said, and by the time I got there, almost 10 minutes later, my dad was already there. I pulled onto one street, and my dad pulled out right behind the truck in his. My dad tailed the guy and started honking his horn repeatedly. At the next street, the Mohawk guy suddenly turned off, and my dad followed him. My dad then called me and told me to go home and said the guy was speeding away. He and I then drove home, and when we got there, the Mohawk guy was long gone. I still don't know where the guy started to follow me, or why he was following me. I don't recommend anybody to do what my dad did, because we didn't really know if the guy could have been dangerous. Either way, I'm hoping nothing like this ever happens again.
A few years back, my family was preparing to host Thanksgiving at our house for the 5th year in a row. We were expecting many guests, so we decided to buy a lot of food. I was a junior or senior in high school at the time, and I worked at an electronics store. It was the night before Thanksgiving, and my mother asked me to pick up some more food last minute on my way home from work. I stopped at Walmart, which was very busy. I went inside and got all of the things that my mother had asked for, which took me longer than I had expected because of all the people that were there. When I was done, I walked back to my car and put the groceries inside of it. When I did, I noticed there was a car parked next to me with several people in it in the parking lot. As soon as I got near my car, it started up. I didn't pay much attention to it, and I started my engine and drove away. The car left at the exact same time as me and remained behind me for quite some time. It was a typical looking car, maybe a little bit old, and was black. I only lived about 5 to 10 minutes away from the store and made it back pretty quickly. I was slightly concerned though when I turned onto my street and saw the car turn on as well. I figured it was a coincidence and I pulled into my driveway, but when I did, I noticed the car stopped on the street in front of my house. I went inside and unpacked the groceries and then went back to the window to see if the car was still there. Sure enough, it was, and that's when I told my parents and older brother about it. They said they wanted to go outside and confront whoever it was, so they walked outside, but as soon as they made it out the front door, the car drove away. Relieved, I went back and helped my mother prepare some of the food for the next day. Later on that night though, as I was about to go to sleep, I heard 2 very loud bangs at the front door. It was very startling. Several of us walked over to the window, but by the time we got there, we didn't see anything at all. We stayed on alert for a few minutes, but eventually we all decided to try to go to bed. I was able to finally fall asleep, but was awakened not much longer at 2 a.m. to hear the sound of a banging noise coming from outside. I got out of bed and walked out to the living room. I saw my parents standing in the hallway and heard my mom say she was calling the police. I went to the window and saw 2 people banging on the window of our car in the driveway. Before long, one of the windows broke. They kept banging on the windows as the glass kept shattering, and then they went inside the car. My dad ran to the front door and opened it a crack and shouted that he had called the police. They didn't seem fazed though and remained inside the car. When I looked to the street, sure enough, the same black car that had been following me was parked across from us again. A couple of minutes later, the police arrived. They quickly ran to the car in our driveway and arrested the two people. We were all very relieved when that happened. I have no clue why those people chose to target us and break into our car, other than that they were completely insane. We ended up staying up until 3 that morning, but nevertheless, it ended up being a really good Thanksgiving the next day.
Many years ago, when I was a kid, I was going with my parents to my uncle's house for Thanksgiving. He lived in the city in a big neighborhood with lots of houses. I was probably about 7 or 8 at the time, and it was nice, but there wasn't really anyone else my age there, so I would get bored at family things. We got there and talked to everyone in the family that was there. I remember at one point I was looking out the front window, and I saw a man walking down the street slowly and kind of looking at each house as he passed by. Then about 30 minutes later, I saw him walk by again, this time in the other direction. Over the next hour or so, I saw him walk by several other times. He seemed to be just walking back and forth down the street, wandering around. Eventually, somebody else there noticed and made a comment about it. Then he walked away once again, and I didn't see him for a while. Soon after that, it was time to eat, and afterwards, I went out to the yard to play football. It was just me playing football with myself because there were no other kids there, but I still liked to throw it around because my uncle had one of those mini trampolines. I would put it up against the fence as a target to throw at. I was practicing my throws when one of the balls bounced away to the side. When I went to get it, I saw it was next to a thick bush, and hiding in the bush was the bald man. I freaked out and ran all the way back inside, screaming. I ran to my parents and told them what had happened. They went outside, but the man was gone by then. My uncle looked around his yard, then walked up and down the street for a bit, but we figured the man had to be scared off. A few hours went by, and most people went home. It was just me and my parents and my aunt and uncle chatting in the kitchen. Then, out of nowhere, there was a knock at one of the back windows of my uncle's house. We looked just in time to see the man ducking down below the window. He then ran away. My uncle had had enough and he called the police. They showed up about 10 minutes later and were able to catch the man. He turned out to be on some sort of drugs and was walking around the neighborhood being creepy.
I am the owner and manager of a local outdoor supplies store. Every year, like most stores, we get very busy around the holidays, and Black Friday is the busiest day of the year for us. So every year, we hire a few seasonal employees to work the last couple of months. Last year in particular, I really needed to hire some people fast, so I hired 2 people, a woman named Amber and a guy named Alan. They were both pretty good workers. Alan didn't talk much at all, however, and he always seemed a little bit strange, but as long as he did his job, I really didn't care. When Black Friday came, obviously, I needed everybody who worked at the store to be working that day. We opened at 6 a.m., and while we didn't get the same rush that Target or Walmart might get, we still got quite a few customers on that day. The first hours went by very quickly because of how busy we all were. I was doing a little bit of everything, being the owner and manager, and I had somebody at both registers which had long lines the entire time. We were making tons of sales, which meant lots of money, so I was pretty happy. At about 2 p.m., things were still very busy, and I needed to go to the back room of the store to get some items which had recently sold out. Our back room was actually on the left of the store, and I walked over to it and went inside. As soon as I got inside, I heard movements coming from the corner of it as if somebody else was in there. I had just seen most of my workers, so I didn't think any of them would be in there. It was fairly dark, and I walked a little bit farther to where the noise was coming from. Then I saw 4 large men, all dressed in black as well as ski masks, with multiple boxes in their hands. They had the door leading out to the dumpster behind the store open, and I quickly realized that we were being robbed. As soon as they saw me, one of them yelled at me not to move. I was probably about 10 feet away from them, and I didn't know if I would be able to outrun them. Before I could really think about what to do, one of them walked over quickly to me and put his hand on my arm and held me there. I could only watch as they packed the boxes into the car behind the store and took about 2 more trips worth of things. They really knew what to take because they were stealing some of the most valuable things that we had in the store and seemed to know exactly where they were. I couldn't believe this was happening. It was really unbelievable for me. I wish I had some type of silent alarm that I could have used, but we weren't a very high-tech store. Then I heard the door to the back room open coming from the store. When I looked, Alan walked through the door and into the back room. He looked surprised to see what was going on. I was hoping he would run and turn around and call the police, but instead, he stopped in place and looked at me and then walked closer. I was expecting the men to grab him as they did to me, but instead, he walked with the men and out to the back door. They made me go to the back door as well. Then Alan, along with the 4 men, all got into the truck parked behind the store and drove away. I was stunned at what I had just seen. Apparently, Alan was in on the job. It was a relief that they didn't hurt me, and as soon as they left, I called the police. They arrived shortly after and said they would look for the truck. I gave them all of Alan's information that I knew as well. When we looked over the security footage though, all of the cameras had been shut off, I'm guessing by Alan. None of the men have ever been caught.
A few years ago, I went Black Friday shopping by myself. It was Thanksgiving night, and I wanted to get a head start on Christmas shopping. Plus, there were some really good deals. I had already sort of planned some gifts of what I was going to get for a few of my family members and friends. In my family, Thanksgiving and Christmas is a really big deal, so I had a lot of things to buy. I was at my parents' house for Thanksgiving, and I only lived about 10 minutes away in my apartment. At about 9 p.m. or so, I left my parents' house to go shopping. My plan was to only be gone for like 2 hours and then return to my parents. First, I went to Target and was going to go to Walmart afterwards. Both of these stores had already been open for a couple of hours. They were both also within like 2 minutes of each other. After arriving at Target, the parking lot was packed with cars everywhere. I went inside and saw that it was extremely busy. I wouldn't expect anything less on Black Friday. After browsing around, I found several things and ended up buying them. Then I left Target and headed to Walmart. That store was more of the same as Target. People everywhere and very busy. I spent about 30 minutes inside, finding everything that I needed to. I was very happy with how my shopping trip went, and I left at about 10:15 and headed back to my car. After I started to drive back to my parents' place, I was exiting out of the Walmart, and I was about to go back onto the road when I saw something. This particular area where I was driving was like on the side of Walmart. It was much quieter than the front, and much darker and not as many lights. I saw what appeared to be a female child wearing a bright pink jacket just sitting there on the side of the road. It wasn't like a bus stop or anything either, and nobody else appeared to be around. I felt like she might have been lost or something. It seemed like I needed to stop and make sure that she was okay. I slowed down my car and then came to a stop, and when I did, I saw her immediately get up and start to approach me. But now that I was close to her and could actually see, I realized that I was wrong. This was not a child, but a grown woman. She was small, maybe like 5 feet, very short, and also young, probably in her early 20s, but definitely not a child. When I saw this, I wanted to just drive away, but I had already stopped. I rolled down my window, and she came like right up to it. She was wearing a winter hat and had long brown hair. Before I said anything, she asked me if I could help her. I asked her what was wrong. She said that she was stranded and needed a ride home. I didn't really want to give somebody that I didn't know a ride. She claimed that she didn't live very far, and then looked like she was going to start crying. I caved and said okay and told her to get in. I didn't think I was in any danger or anything. I mean, she was very small, and in my opinion, she was lucky that I stopped for her and not some kidnapper or something. I was more just annoyed because it was late at night and I wanted to get back home. She went around and got in the front passenger seat. When she was in the car, I asked her where she was going. She gave me an address, and I entered it into Google Maps on my phone. I saw that it was just 7 minutes away, and that made me feel good. At least she wasn't asking me to drive all the way across town. We started driving, and she didn't say a whole lot. She mostly just went on her phone. We did make some small conversation, talking about Thanksgiving and Black Friday shopping. Overall, she seemed pretty nice and friendly to me. The drive went by relatively quick, but we ended up going into an area that I had never been to before and was not familiar with, even though it wasn't that far away. When we got to the neighborhood where the address was, I saw that it was in the rough side of town. There were streets with lots of houses on them, most of which looked pretty run down. At last, I got to the address and pulled into the driveway. I asked her if this was it, and she said yes, but after I stopped the car, she did not immediately get out. I was confused. She was on her phone, and it looked like she was finishing up a text or something. After a few seconds, I said, "Well, I better get back home now." She said, "Oh, yeah, thank you so much." She asked me for my name, and I gave it to her. Then she opened the door and started to get out of the car. It was at that moment, right when the door opened, that I suddenly noticed a guy sprinting full speed at me. He was coming from the side of the house, and I hadn't seen him before at all. He must have been behind it. I then looked to the right and saw another guy sprinting from the other side of the house. The only thing I thought to do was drive away. I put the car in reverse and slammed my foot on the gas pedal. I started reversing, and the men both reached my car. I hit lock just in time, but the front passenger's door was still open. The guy on the right briefly grabbed it, but I was a little bit too fast. He wasn't able to hold on, and when I got out of the driveway, I put it into drive and sped out of there. I saw both men running into the street. The woman was still standing in the driveway. I called the police as soon as I made it off of the street and reported the whole thing. Then I drove all the way back home. I'm really grateful that I got away from them. I know that the woman set me up, I'm guessing to get robbed. I regret picking her up, and I would advise anybody not to ever give a stranger a ride, and not to accept rides from strangers either. That is my Black Friday horror story. This story happened when I was in college. I was a graduate student living on campus about an hour away from my parents' house. When the week of Thanksgiving came, I went home after classes on Monday. We had the whole rest of the week off, so I would be staying at my parents' house for a little while. When I got back home, the second day, during the night, I was sleeping in my bedroom when I was awoken. Now, my bedroom is on the first floor, and it's on the front side of the house. It was the middle of the night, and I thought that I heard the sound of a knocking on my window. It was really creepy. I sat up in bed and looked over to the window. There was a curtain covering it, so I couldn't really see anything. I did not hear the knocking again, so I got up, walked over to the window, and looked out of it. When I looked around the yard, everything seemed fine, and I didn't notice anything. I still didn't know what made the sound, though. I went back to my bed and sat down, still looking in the direction of the window. That's when I saw something move past the window only for a brief second. I couldn't see any details because I really just saw the shadow from the other side of the curtains, but somebody had definitely walked past outside. I got up again, ran over to the window, and looked out. Whoever it was gone again. I glanced all around the yard of what I could see, but I never saw anything at all. I went back to my bed again and sat back down and didn't see anything for the next few minutes. I didn't know exactly what was going on. After it seemed like things were back to normal, I tried to go back to sleep again. I laid down and closed my eyes. A few minutes later, when I was starting to fall asleep, I heard knocking again on the window. There was no mistaking it. I sat up and saw that somebody was right outside. I couldn't tell who they were because my curtains were still closed. I could just see like a silhouette of their figure. It looked to be a man. Then I heard what sounded like a faint laughter coming from the other side of the window. It was really creepy. I turned on all of the lights to my bedroom and then saw the guy finally moving away. He left my sight, and when I got to the window, he was gone again. Somebody was definitely messing with me, but I didn't know who or why. I stayed up for quite a while before finally was able to go back to sleep. The next day, I told my parents about it. We were unsure of what could be done. There were no signs of an attempted break-in. I couldn't even give a description of the man. We just hoped that it wouldn't happen again. The next day went by as normal, but that night I stayed up late watching TV in the living room with my parents. It was a little bit after midnight when we all heard a noise coming from the other room. We all got up at once and went over to a window. From there, though, we couldn't see anything. We heard the noise again. Now it was more clear that somebody was hitting my bedroom window. We called the police and then moved as far to the other side of the house as we could. We heard another noise. After that, things were quiet for a while. The police arrived really fast, though. When they got there, they found a man hiding in our backyard. None of us knew who he was. The guy had been trying to break into our house through my bedroom window. The window hadn't even broke, though, but there were some marks on it. I'm really glad that he didn't get in. I'm also really glad that I was not in my bedroom at the time, but with my parents in the living room. It had to be the same guy who had been there the night before. Since this happened, every year when I go back to my parents for Thanksgiving, we joke around about it. At the time, it wasn't so funny though, and I'm really glad that everyone is okay.
This happened last year. I currently work at a pretty popular clothing store. I've been working there for almost 2 years and do a little bit of everything. Last year was my first Black Friday at that store. I'd worked Black Friday one other time at a previous retail job I had, and I also go Black Friday shopping every year, so I knew about how busy and crazy it could possibly get. I worked at 5 a.m. on Friday, and when we opened, things got busy pretty much right away. After working at the cash registers for a few hours, I moved to organizing things throughout the store. We were slightly less busy, but still had lots of people throughout the store. I was at one end when a man approached me. He was holding a sweater, and he asked me if they had it in a size medium. I looked at it and then walked over to where the sweaters were. I saw that we did have several of them and showed them to the man, but he didn't seem too interested in the actual sweaters. Instead, he started asking me questions about myself, how I was doing when I got off work, if I was single. The guy seemed like a total creep. He was tall, thin, and bald. I talked professionally to him, and finally, I think he got the hint that I wasn't interested in him, and he went on his way. I went back to doing the work that I had been. However, I did notice the guy staring at me from a distance. It wasn't all that obvious, especially with all the people that were there, but it sure was creepy. I looked up every minute or so, and would always see the guy standing somewhere staring at me. I was really creeped out. Soon after, though, it was time for one of my breaks. It couldn't have come at a better time. I was really happy to get off the sales floor away from this guy. I'd been working for several hours now, and when I came back from my break, the store was still really busy, but the man was now gone. I didn't see him anywhere throughout the store and was really happy about that. I worked until 1 p.m. and then, finally, was off for the day. I was tired, but planned on going shopping with my friend Amelia afterwards. So, I got some coffee at Starbucks and then we did some Black Friday shopping. When I got home that night, I watched a movie and fell asleep at my apartment. However, I woke up at some point. I really didn't know what woke me, but I sat up in bed and looked around. Then, I saw the same creepy guy from earlier. He was staring right into my bedroom window. My apartment was on ground level, so he could just look right in. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Was this a dream? It wasn't. We were making eye contact, and he just kept staring at me. I was terrified, and I ran out of my bedroom and into the bathroom that was out of view of the windows. I shut the door and then called the police. I explained to them that some guy was staring into my bedroom window who had also been staring at me at work earlier in the day. As I was on my phone, I thought that I heard him trying to open the back door leading outside from my apartment. I stayed in the bathroom with the door locked. The police got there about 10 minutes later. Unfortunately, the man was long gone by then. They looked around but couldn't find him. There was really nothing else that could be done, so after telling me to call them if I saw anything else, the police left. I was sure to cover all of my windows well before going back to bed. I haven't seen the guy since then at all, but it still scares me that he knows where I live. I really don't know how he found out where I lived either, other than thinking he must have somehow followed me home, which is really creepy. After the holiday season last year, I got another job, but I still occasionally work at the same store, and now with Black Friday coming up, I'm planning to help out and work there again. Hopefully the guy doesn't return.
I used to work at Target when I was younger. I worked there for about a year and had to work during a Black Friday. During that time, we actually opened on Thanksgiving night, I believe at 6 o'clock p.m. Just about all of the Target employees were scheduled to work that night, it seemed. Target was going to stay open all night and then again the next day on Friday. We were expecting to get tons and tons of shoppers, and many deals were going on throughout the store. It was an experience like no other. I usually worked in the store as a sales associate and sometimes a cashier if they needed me. When I got there a short time before we opened, I had to park towards the far back corner of the parking lot, and we had a huge parking lot. I had never seen it so full. As I approached the store, I saw a line of at least 100 people waiting to be let inside. To that point, I had never gone shopping on Thanksgiving before, just in the early morning on the actual Black Friday. I was let in through an employee-only entrance, and then I clocked into work. I saw so many other employees, or team members as we called each other. There was a short meeting beforehand, and then some of the managers went over to unlock the doors. I started out the first hour as a cashier, and when the doors opened, I watched from my check lane as people came pouring in. They mostly ran to the electronics area, and soon, people were coming to all of the check lanes. We had just about every single check lane open, and I was busy ringing people up for the first couple of hours. I was only working until midnight, so it was not that bad of a shift. And because it was 6 hours, I would get a 30-minute break at one point. After 3 hours of being at the check lanes, at 9 p.m., a manager came and told me that it was time for my break. I turned off the light to my check lane and then headed past the many people inside and over to the break room. When I got inside, I sat down at a table and pulled out my phone. I had several texts and Snapchats from friends. One in particular stood out though. There was a text from a number that I didn't recognize. I was very good at having names stored on my phone as everybody that I texted or called, so I knew who it was. The text from this unknown person said, "When you're on your break, meet me at the back of the store." I responded by asking who it was. Then I responded to all the other texts and snaps from various friends. Whoever had texted me before responded again, telling me to just come to the back of the store. I was really curious, but I had no idea who this was. I had several of my coworkers' numbers, and they were stored on my phone with their names. It was possible that it was another coworker, but why wouldn't they just tell me? I actually left the break room and decided to go to the back of the store to see who it was. What part of the back of the store I was supposed to go to, though, was not clear. Target is a large store, and the back can refer to quite a bit of space. I made my way through the large crowd of shoppers. On the way to the back, even though I took my name tag off, I was asked by about 5 people about things. Some asked where products were. Others asked me if certain things were still in stock or on sale. At last, I made it to the back of the store. I walked along it and didn't see anybody that I knew, and nobody waved at me or approached. I went back to the break room after that for the remainder of my break. Towards the end of it, the number texted me again. The new text said, "I saw you. It was too busy, and I will catch up with you after work at midnight." I wasn't sure who this was still, and I didn't know how they knew when I got off. I texted them again, asking who this was. Then I went back to work. After I went back to work, I was moved to the sales floor from the check lanes. As I worked, I was able to check my phone a couple of times, but I didn't get a response from whoever it was that had been texting me. Soon, I forgot all about it and was very busy with work. For the next few hours, I did various things, and it remained extremely busy the entire time. By the time it was almost midnight, things were a little bit more calm, but still very busy. In that entire time, I didn't notice anybody that was strange or looking at me. I helped quite a few customers, but none of them stood out as possibly being the one who had texted me. When it was 12 o'clock, I was finally done for the night. I walked to the employees' hallway and clocked out. Then I left the busy store and walked out into the parking lot. There was still lots of cars all around. However, the area where I parked was slightly more open now. As I walked through the parking lot to my vehicle, I felt my phone vibrate. I took it out of my pocket and looked. There was a text from the same number from earlier. In the new text, whoever it was said they were waiting by my car. I was almost halfway there and could barely see my car from where I was. I noticed that directly next to my car on the other side was an SUV. As I kept walking closer, I got a little bit better view of it. I could see that the engine to the SUV was running, but couldn't tell who was inside. I had a really bad feeling about it and decided to turn around. Then I went back inside Target. When I got back inside, I went straight to the break room, and there were a few other people in there. I was going to maybe text my parents and ask one of them to come pick me up or something, but one of my best friends at work, Lexi, was in the break room. I walked over to her and told her about what was happening. She said that somebody had asked her about me earlier when she was working. A man had apparently approached her and claimed to be a good friend of mine. He asked her for my number, and she had no reason not to believe that he didn't really know me, so she gave it to him. She said that he was tall, thin, had a slight beard, and shorter, dark-colored hair. From what she said, it didn't sound like anybody that I knew. After a few more minutes talking to her, one of the security people we had working that night came into the break room. When I saw him, I told him about my situation and asked him to go out to my car with me. He agreed, and when we left the store, the car was still parked next to mine. We walked closer, and when we made it within 50 feet or so of the car, it drove away. I was able to get to my car safely and then carefully drove home, making sure that I wasn't followed. There was a lot of other cars around, going to Target and other nearby stores, so if the guy wanted to follow me, it would have been pretty tough. But he didn't. I was really glad to make it back safe. When I got home, I saw that I had another text from him. He called me a curse word, and then I blocked his number. That made for a very memorable Black Friday. That guy must have seen me working earlier in the night, and maybe even one of my previous shifts at Target. He must have got my name from my name tag, and then told Lexi that he was my friend, and then got my number from her. I'm guessing he found out what time I got off and what car was mine, possibly from other coworkers. It really creeps me out to think about it. Luckily, though, I never saw him again after that.
This happened a few years ago. I went with my family to my aunt and uncle's house for Thanksgiving. They have a pretty large house, and it's good for having lots of people over. Most of the family gatherings take place there. So on Thanksgiving, I remember that we had been there for a while, and I was watching football in the living room with several other people. They have a pretty large TV there, and it's great to watch games on. Some other people were just off at the dining room, which is the next room over, sitting at the tables and talking. Then I remember that I overheard some people in the dining room talking about a man in the yard. I listened closer and found out that some random guy was apparently standing in the yard. My aunt and uncle's property is pretty large, and the neighborhood is not gated or anything, but it has a more private feel to it. The properties and houses are larger, and you don't really see people prowling around or anything much, so this was really strange. I got up and went over to the window to look. I was only able to just barely see the guy walking closer to the house and then went out of sight. He went towards the sliding glass door that led to the basement, but luckily that door was locked and the man was not able to get inside. By that point, almost everybody at the Thanksgiving gathering was talking about the guy. After trying to enter the basement, the man moved away, and this time I saw him walk back through the yard and eventually disappear behind a tree. He was going back towards the road, and we hoped that he was leaving the property. Nobody had any idea as to who he was or what he was doing there. It was getting dark out by this time, and it was probably about 5 p.m. or so. I remember that things went back to normal for a while, but maybe 30 minutes to an hour later, there was suddenly a knock at the front door. I remember soon after hearing that the same guy was there. My uncle opened up the door to him and asked what he wanted. I didn't really hear the conversation, but my uncle soon came back over and said that the guy claimed to be at the wrong address. Apparently, the man said that he was going to a friend's for Thanksgiving and thought that it was my uncle's house. For some reason, we didn't really believe it. The guy seemed very sketchy overall, especially how he had tried entering the basement door. Why not go to the front door in the first place? I figured that was that. However, later on in the night, I was back in the living room watching football again. Once more, I heard somebody ask if the man was back. This time, I got up right away and walked into the dining room. I saw my mom and one of my aunts sitting at the table near the window that looked out into the backyard. It was tough to see because it was dark out now, but at the back end of the yard there was a large woods, and we saw a man standing on the edge of the woods. He appeared to just kind of be looking at the house, and that woods was not really that close to any neighbor's property at all, so it was really strange that the guy would be there. He just kept standing there, partly behind a tree, and looking in our direction. After literally like 5 minutes, he finally moved away. Then we saw him sprinting through the yard and then went out of sight. It was really strange. For the rest of the time that I was there that night,
Nobody saw the guy. I never really heard anything more about him. I'm not really sure what the guy was doing. About 5 years ago, we were hosting Thanksgiving at our house. It was my wife, our 2 kids, and me who lived there. Our kids were pretty little at the time, and we were expecting about 20 or more people for Thanksgiving dinner, pretty much all of them being family members. Our house is in a neighborhood with a little bit more land. I would say most properties have roughly 5 acres or so, and it's a nice and quiet place to live. On Thanksgiving, our guests started arriving at about 1 p.m. or so. We were going to have dinner at like 4 or 5, so we had some snacks out and things like that. More and more people were arriving, and pretty soon, almost everybody, if not everybody, was there. I was helping out and getting food ready, also talking to family and watching football. At one point, there was a knock on our front door, and I went to go answer it to let whoever was there in. But when I got to the door, no one was there. I stepped outside and looked around. Our driveway was full of cars, and there were even some cars parked out in the street in front of the house, but I didn't see anybody. I hadn't taken all that long to get to the door either. I asked if anybody was there, but still got nothing, so I just went back inside after that. Before long, all of the people that we were expecting were there, but once again, after this, I heard another knock on the door again. When I went to answer it, there was nobody there. Now I was a little bit confused, but with everything going on, I quickly forgot about it. About an hour later, some of the kids that were there, as well as a few adults, wanted to go out and play some football. It was pretty good weather, a little chilly, but not too cold at all. I went to the closet right in front of our front door to get my coat, and when I opened up the door, I saw a woman, but not anybody that I knew. It was like she was hiding in there, and she had on a winter hat and looked at me with an angry face. I was sort of in shock, and just stood there for a moment, unable to speak. The woman then emerged from the closet and ran past me, headed upstairs, which was only a couple of feet away. She ran out of there so fast. Nobody else really saw this, and I went around asking if anybody knew who she was. Pretty soon, everybody at the gathering was talking about who this woman could be. Thankfully, nobody was upstairs when she ran up. Not anybody there knew her, and I took a couple of steps up the stairs and yelled, asking who she was and why she was in our house. She didn't answer, though. I told her that she needed to come down and leave out the front door or I was going to call the police. Still nothing, so that's exactly what I did. I stayed by the stairs in case the woman was going to come back down and made sure that nobody else went up or anything like that. For the most part, everybody stayed away from that part of the house and in the living room, dining room, and kitchen. About 10 minutes later, the police arrived. When they did, I told them what had happened and they went upstairs. They were up there for a while, and when they came back down, they said that the woman was no longer there and they thought she had jumped out of a window. I went upstairs and saw that a window in one of the bedrooms was wide open. The police guessed that she jumped out. The distance to the ground in that area was really not all that high, and it was a doable jump. The police went outside and searched the property a bit. We had a large yard with a bit of a woods, but unfortunately, they never found her. They left and we went back to our Thanksgiving get-together. Thankfully, we never did see the woman again. I've always wondered, though, who she was and what she was doing.
This is something that happened back when I was a senior in high school. During that time, I worked a job at a local department store. I lived with my parents and brother in a decently populated neighborhood. I remember that we had off of school the day before Thanksgiving on Wednesday. Because of this, I worked earlier in the day so that I could get some extra hours and money. I got to work in the morning and got off of work at probably like 3 or 4 in the afternoon. Afterwards, my mom had asked me to stop and get a few things on the way back. I went to a local grocery store that was about 10 minutes away from our house. There were a few other stores and things nearby, so it was hard to even find a parking space. A lot of other people were there doing grocery shopping, and this was a busy time. When I got inside of the store, people were all over the place. I tried my best to find the things that my mom had asked me to get. It took a little while, but I was able to, and then I got into the back of one of the lines. I think there were about 4 or 5 check lanes that were open, and there were a bunch of people in each line. I had never really seen it this busy before. Finally, after waiting in line for a while, it was my turn. I checked out and then headed home. I got maybe 4 or 5 items, and it had taken me about 30 minutes. That's how busy it was. When I got back to my car in the parking lot, I left and started driving back to my parents' house. The drive back would just be taking one road for a few minutes, and then turning once to a quieter road, before ours. The roads were pretty busy on the way back, When I finally turned onto our street, I remember a car turning right behind me. Our street was generally pretty quiet, but other cars driving down was not out of the ordinary. When I got to my house, though, I pulled into the driveway, and the car that was behind me pulled in too. This made me feel nervous, and I wondered what was going on. I just remembered the car being a dark-colored sedan and very average-looking. But then the car started backing up and turned around. They must have just been using our driveway to turn around and then go back the other way. But it was still kind of weird. Why not turn in any of the other neighbors' driveways? Why follow me into mine? Either way, they were gone now, and I felt much better as I saw the car start to go out of sight. I got out with the groceries and went inside the house. I gave them to my mom, who was already starting to cook. We were going to some other family members for Thanksgiving the next day, and everybody was bringing a few things over. I don't remember exactly what my mom was making, but I think it was some kind of pie. After getting home, I went into my room and finished my homework, and then for the rest of the night hung out with my family. We all went to bed and could sleep in a little bit the next day because it was Thanksgiving and none of us had work or school. However, for some reason, I woke up much earlier than I had planned. I remember opening my eyes and looking at my phone to see that it was 6-something in the morning. The sun was just starting to rise. I was really thirsty and sat up to get a drink of water. As I was doing so, there was a window right next to me, and I opened up the blinds a little bit to look out. When I did, I saw a car parked on the side of the road, kind of in front of our house. This was really weird. We rarely, if ever, had anybody parking out there. And if they were going to a neighbor's house, there was plenty of space to park in front of the other houses. This was the only car that I noticed parked on the side of the entire street also. It just looked really suspicious. The car was a black sedan, and it was the same as I had seen the day before, but in my head, I hadn't remembered that yet. The closer I looked, I saw that there was nobody inside of it. Now I was really interested in what was going on here. Instead of closing my blinds and going right back to bed, I stayed up a bit and kept watching. About a minute went by of nothing. Then, all of a sudden, I saw a man come walking from what appeared to be the side of our house. He was wearing a winter hat and a dark-colored jacket. I couldn't tell what he looked like, and I had no clue what he was doing. He walked through part of our front yard and then back to his car. He didn't get inside of the driver's seat, though. Instead, he went to the back door of his car. He opened it up, and it looked like he was getting something from inside, but I couldn't tell what. He was there for like a minute. Then he closed the door and turned around. He was holding like a really small duffel bag. At least that's what it appeared to be. It was kind of hard to tell though, because it was still a little bit dark out and he was far away. He took a few steps and then appeared to look right in my direction. When he did, he stopped. I realized that he could see me. There was a small lamp in my room and it was dim, but it still provided light. And if my blinds were open like they were, you could see inside. I quickly closed them and then ducked down. I didn't know what was going to happen. Just seconds later though, I heard the sound of a car door closing. I carefully lifted the blinds just a little bit and looked out the window. I saw the car quickly driving away. Whoever that guy was had left. Now I was wide awake and couldn't go back to bed. I got up, and when my parents got up as well, I told them all about it. We went outside and looked all around, but there was no signs of a break-in or anything. And after that day, we never saw the man or his car. I really don't know what was going on there. Maybe whatever he had planned on doing, after he realized I saw him, he decided not to. I really don't know though. I'm just glad that he didn't come back. This story took place a long time ago. I was looking to buy a new TV, and when I saw the Black Friday deals at Walmart, I couldn't believe their prices. I decided that I was going to go on Black Friday and get a TV. The store was opening really early in the morning, I think at like 5 a.m. On Thanksgiving, I didn't bother to go to Walmart early and camp out or anything. I had a normal time with my family and then got up super early at like 4 a.m. I got to Walmart about 30 minutes before they opened. What I saw was a large line of people waiting for the doors to open. I even saw somebody had a tent. I was a little bit worried that all of the TVs were going to sell out before I had a chance to get one. I got in the back of the line after what was probably hundreds of people in front of me. Some more people ended up getting in line behind me as I waited, and eventually it was time for the store to finally open. I heard some cheering up ahead from the crowd. Then the line finally started to move. At first, things were very organized, but then people started walking faster and there was kind of like a traffic jam. I witnessed a few people getting shoved a little bit and some people passing others before they got inside the store. I was by myself, so I was just trying to make sure that I didn't get run over and I didn't run over anybody else in the process. When I finally made it into the store, I headed straight for the electronics department, which happened to be in the back middle of the store. Unfortunately, just about everybody else was going in that direction too. I wasn't running to get there or anything, but some people were. I felt like if I was able to get the TV that I wanted, then great, but if I wasn't, it wasn't that big of a deal. I would get another one sometime soon. It wasn't worth going crazy for. It took longer than expected to make it to the electronics department with all the other people. When I got there, I could not physically walk close to the TVs. It was like something out of a movie. People were packed in like sardines, and I saw several employees trying to keep the place in order. I was slowly inching my way closer, maneuvering through the crowd without stepping on anybody's feet. I got closer and closer. At one point, though, I saw a kid, maybe 12 or 13 years old, grabbing a box of a gaming system off of a shelf. As the kid turned, I witnessed a man literally grab it right out of his hands. I thought it was the kid's father at first, but based on the kid's reaction and the man's reaction, I realized that it wasn't. The man quickly turned and then started walking away, and the kid tried to go after him. I saw the sadness in the boy's eyes, and I felt horrible. The worst part is that nobody else seemed to notice. It was literally chaos, so it was hard to see everything happening. They were pretty far away from me, and I decided to try and see if I could get to the man. He was now fleeing, visibly walking as fast as he could away from the boy, who was trying to get after him, but couldn't because of the crowd. Soon, the kid stopped going after the man and returned to what seemed to be his parents. I was looking back and forth between the man and the boy. The boy was with his parents trying to point out where the man had gone, but he couldn't seem to find him. I looked over and saw the man was now farther away. The entire store was busy with people, but this was the busiest part. I started to go faster through the crowd to try and cut the guy off. He didn't notice me getting closer to him, and after about a minute, I had made it within 10 feet of the guy. I called out to him, but the store was pretty loud with all of the people. I maneuvered my way around a few other people and finally caught up with the man. I tapped his shoulder, which he actually ignored. Then I grabbed his shoulder, kind of turning him around. He looked back at me, already with an angry look on his face. He appeared to be in his 40s, had dark brown hair and an average build. I asked him why he took the game from the kid. The man said he didn't know what I was talking about, and he didn't take anything from a kid. Then he turned to keep going. Now I knew that he was lying. I stopped him, and then I reached for the gaming console that he held. The man was very defensive and pulled it away, then in almost the same motion, shoved me so hard that I almost fell. I bumped back into like 5 other people who looked at us very confused. I quickly got up and ran back over to the guy. He had already turned and was trying to walk away extremely fast. I started running, and when I got behind him, I punched at the video game, which he was holding with one arm. I was like an NFL football player trying to punch out the football to cause a fumble. It worked because the man didn't see me coming. I hit the game and it flew out of the man's arms and onto the floor. My momentum caused me to run into the guy a little bit. We both went forward as the video game now lay on the floor behind us. The guy turned around and so did I. We started to go after it, but as we did, I saw someone else, a totally random person, swoop in and pick up the video game. Then that person literally ran off down another random aisle. The guy started to run after him, but whoever it was extremely fast and out of sight by now. They disappeared around a corner. The man then turned to me, realizing he couldn't get to the game, and started screaming and cursing me out. I gave it back to him a little bit as we were both very heated. This lasted for maybe 30 seconds before a couple of Walmart employees approached us. I told them the story and the guy told his version. His version was that he simply picked the system up off the shelf, happened to get the last one, and then I chased him down, tackled him, and tried to steal it. As we were both pleading our cases, it was like a miracle when I saw the boy and his family walking over. When I saw them, I called them over and told the Walmart employee this was the kid who had the game stolen from him. As soon as the kid started walking over, the other guy turned and just left. A Walmart employee yelled for him to come back, but he was already too far gone. The employees realized that I was right after a small discussion, but it didn't mean a whole lot anymore. The gaming system was gone, and so was the man who took it from the kid. The bottom line is, the kid didn't get it. It did make me feel slightly better, though, to know that the man didn't get it either. I talked with the boy and his parents for a bit, and they were grateful that I tried to help. They said their son had saved up his allowance and had mowed lawns all summer to save up to buy the game. They had also waited in line for almost 5 hours. It was a sad situation, but the kid seemed to take it pretty well. He would probably be able to get it in a couple of weeks. After we talked, I walked away and headed back over to the electronics. I had gotten so involved that I had basically forgotten why I had gone there in the first place. I slowly made my way over to the TVs, with there still being a large crowd. It was actually possible to walk now and had lightened up just a little bit, but it was still very busy. When I got over to the TVs, I couldn't believe it, but they still had a couple of the ones that I wanted. I picked one up and then headed to the checkouts. It probably took another 30 minutes, but eventually I was able to pay for my TV and then leave the store. When I left and got out into the parking lot, that was very busy too. There were people constantly walking in and walking out. There were cars all over the place, both parked and driving. I had parked pretty far in the back, and when I finally got to my vehicle, I opened up the back door to put my TV in. It was in this moment when I heard the sound of a car driving really fast, faster than it should be in a parking lot. I looked to where I heard the noise. That's when I saw a gray sedan driving from the back end of the parking lot towards me. I finished putting my TV in the car and closed the door. The car then slammed on its brakes and stopped right behind my vehicle. I looked and saw the man who I had fought with earlier. He was driving the car. I quickly ran for my driver's door and opened it. As I was doing this, I heard the man's car door opening. I got inside as fast as possible and then locked my doors. Just seconds later, the man arrived at my window. He started pounding on it and tried opening my driver's door. He was yelling and cursing at me like crazy. I ignored him and just put my car into drive and pulled out. Luckily for me, nobody was parked in front of me, so I could do that. The man started running back to his car, but I got out of there as quick as possible, and the parking lot was so crowded that the man was unable to follow me. There was no doubt in my mind, though, that if he was able to, he would have. I drove back home and never saw the guy again. Looking back at that experience, I don't regret what I did. I'm glad that I tried helping the kid, and I'm sad that he didn't get his game. The man was just a really greedy person. But Black Friday shopping can get crazy like that sometimes. I've gone Black Friday shopping a few times since then, but never had an experience quite like that.
Several years ago, I went Black Friday shopping at Walmart. There were several locations near where I lived, and most of them opened at 6 p.m. on Thanksgiving night. I had looked at their ad, and I knew of several items that were on sale that I was interested in. The ones I wanted most were electronics. Several video games caught my eye, a laptop, and possibly a TV. I wasn't desperate to get these things, but if I was able to get a great deal, I would do it. I went by myself because nobody else in my family wanted to go shopping on Thanksgiving night and would rather go the next day. I only planned to go to Walmart and was going to go back home afterwards. When I got there, a little after 6, the parking lot was already packed. I had never seen so many cars there before. I really had no interest in standing in a line or running through the store to get stuff like I had seen on some videos of crazy Black Friday shopping. After I parked my car and got inside the store, it was way more crazy than I thought it would be though. It was just like the videos that I had seen. People were literally everywhere. I was getting bumped into by people left and right just after entering the store. More and more people were coming in behind me as well. I quickly realized just getting anything would be difficult. I saw people holding TVs over their heads, and others were literally trying to sprint through the store. Right after seeing all of this, I decided that maybe I should just leave and come back in the morning when things weren't so crazy. I was kind of getting pushed by the wave of people deeper into the store. I walked around through the crowd and finally found an aisle with some walking room. I walked more through the store a bit, but everywhere I went seemed to be extremely crowded. The whole place seemed like complete chaos. I slowly made my way against the crowd, trying to get back to the exit. It took me a while, but eventually I was able to get back outside. I walked back out to my car and went inside before realizing that my wallet was gone. Immediately, my heart sank. I had no idea what had happened, if somebody stole it or if it fell out of my pocket or something. I thought it was unlikely that it fell out and more likely that somebody stole it. I knew that it was in my right side pocket of my pants where I always kept it. When I was in the store, I had bumped into so many people that really anybody probably could have pickpocketed me. Even if it had somehow just fallen out of my pocket, the chances of it still being on the ground without somebody picking it up were slim. Still, I needed to give it a chance, so I went back into the Walmart to look around and see. I walked through the mob of people, looking down at the ground for my wallet. I tried my best to retrace my steps, but never found anything. After that, I decided to go to the service desk and ask if somebody had found it and turned it in. I knew this was a really long shot, and it took probably 15 minutes just to get there and be able to talk to anybody. But when I did, they said they didn't have any lost wallets, and I left the store disappointed. I got back inside my car and tried to think about what possibly had happened. I went on my phone to freeze my credit and debit cards that I had in my wallet. Just then, my phone started to ring. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered the call anyways. There was a man on the other end, and he sounded very friendly. He said that he had found a wallet in Walmart, and he thought it belonged to me, and I was lucky that he found it because he wanted to give it back to me tonight. I felt extremely lucky by this and was super happy that somebody had found my wallet and actually wanted to give it back. I asked if they were still near the Walmart, but they said no. The man on the other end of the phone said that I should come by and pick it up, and he wasn't that far away. He said we could meet outside of his house and asked if he could text me the address. I said sure, and after he texted it to me, the man said that he would see me soon and hung up. I was still just super relieved that I was going to get my wallet back. I put the address into my phone and then left Walmart to go there. It took maybe about 10 minutes to get to the location. It took me in the opposite direction of where I lived, and the roads went from busy to quiet and more isolated. I turned onto a road covered by woods on both sides. Now I was very close to the location, but I was getting a little bit creeped out. I wasn't really seeing any houses at all. The area just seemed like woods or maybe a park. I kept driving and eventually arrived. It definitely was not somebody's house. It looked like an isolated park in the middle of the woods. I hadn't seen another car in a long time either. I parked my car and texted the guy that I was there. I then questioned if I was at the correct location. I got a response saying that I was, and I was then told to walk into the forest. By this point, I knew something was wrong, and I wasn't going to be stupid enough to actually walk into the forest. Still, I was curious. I stood outside my car, observing the area. It was really dark, and I really couldn't see much. It was also very quiet. Then, I heard a noise coming from inside the woods. I got a little scared, but I guess it could have just been an animal, like a squirrel. I texted the number again, asking why I was supposed to walk into the forest, and I thought that I was meeting at the guy's house. After I sent the text, I heard a quiet ding noise coming from inside the woods. When I heard that, I got back inside my car immediately. Getting my wallet back wasn't worth it. After I was inside my car, I turned my headlights on. This revealed what appeared to be a man peeking out from behind a tree in the woods. He then ducked back behind it. I sped out of there, and when I got home, I froze all of the cards that had been in my wallet. Luckily, I only had like $20 in cash in there, but I did need to get a new driver's license. I went to my bank the next morning and was able to get another card. Overall, I don't know who stole my card or how, but I'm glad I didn't go into the woods. I'm also much more careful when I go shopping, especially on Black Friday.
Every Thanksgiving, my family and extended family would get together, basically using the holiday as a family reunion as well. We would always do it at my aunt's house because she had the biggest place and property. It was best suited to fit everyone who came each year, although it would still be crowded. After dinner, the kids would usually be in a separate area of the house, like upstairs or in the basement. I spent a little time with the kids, but not many of my cousins were close to my age, so I spent more time with the adults. I liked spending time with the adults because they were funny and would also have funny stories to share. As I was hanging out with the adults, I noticed something a little strange. My Uncle Bobby had stepped inside after a smoke, and his grin was a little strained. I noticed it right away. He and my dad had served together in the military, and they both had that look, the kind that said that something was gnawing at them. My curiosity got the best of me, and I pulled Bobby's arm, pestering him until he finally took me aside. He pointed across the street to an old house. It was one that I'd heard about all my life, and every time we'd come over to my aunt's house, I was warned to stay away from it. My dad, Uncle Bobby, and the other two adults had explored it when they were younger, and the same group wanted to go check it out again.
When I found out they were going, I somehow convinced them to bring me along. I guess I had pestered them enough about it. The house loomed like a ghost from the past. It was a faded 50s two-story structure with peeling paint. As we entered, I immediately noticed there were tons of drawings on the walls, but they didn't really seem like graffiti. It was more like intentional drawings. Bobby led the way into the kitchen. In the center of the room was a pentagram, flanked by carcasses. They were fresh, only looking a day or two old, and the smell was overwhelming. I realized I might have bitten off a little more than I could chew, and I already wanted to leave. The other adults insisted on checking out the basement though, so I went with them. We turned and headed for a narrow staircase tucked behind a wall. The basement was dim, a stark contrast to the chaos above. Cans of food were scattered around, and makeshift mats were on the ground. A single propane heater was in the middle of the room. In the corner, there was a pile of bones. They looked like chicken bones, at least I hoped they were, but I wasn't sure. It was clear with the carcasses upstairs and stuff in the basement that somebody was living there or had recently been living there. The adults finally all agreed that it was time to go. We had only been there for maybe 5 minutes or less, but I was very scared. As we were leaving out the front door, I was sure that I heard light footsteps upstairs on the second floor. We made it back across the street to my aunt's house safely, and the rest of the night was uneventful. Years later, I learned the truth about that house. There had been a cult based around the area. They used to break into farms and steal small livestock to use for their rituals. But apparently one of the women in the cult had recently run off the rails and started to abduct people in and around the area. I forget the woman's name, but people in that area started calling her the Wicked Witch of the East. The authorities ended up catching 2 of her accomplices, but as far as I know, she herself was never caught. The crazy witch woman might have never been in that house that my family and I had explored. It could have been a house that the more normal cult members who didn't kill people used and stayed in occasionally. Either way, it was a freaky Thanksgiving night, and for all I know, maybe we did stumble across the Wicked Witch of the East that night. This story happened to me many years ago when I was about 12. My family went to Thanksgiving at my grandmother's house every single year. There was quite a few of us that would be there, and we would always watch football and have a big turkey. I remember this year, it was about 3 p.m. and it got kind of crowded inside my grandmother's house. My younger brother and I decided to go outside and walk around. My grandmother had a pretty big property that had some woods on it on either side of the house. She definitely lived more out in the country, so the houses were a lot farther apart. My younger brother and I just kind of walked around the yard. It had snowed a little bit, so the ground was a mix of white snow and the green grass. We ended up wandering off through the side woods a little bit, but then we noticed someone. There was a man standing there about 50 feet away. He looked to be fairly young, but was definitely an adult. He was wearing a t-shirt and sweatpants, which I found strange because it was pretty cold outside. When he noticed us, he waved. Then he called out hi to us in a friendly voice and began to walk over. When we got over to him, he introduced himself and said his name was Oscar. He told us he lived next door, and then pointed over. We could see a house through the trees that he was pointing at. He asked us what we were doing out here, and we told him that we were there for Thanksgiving. The 3 of us chatted for a couple of minutes about basic stuff, until finally I said we should get back. The man then told us he needed some help getting his new washing machine from his garage into his house, and asked us if we would help. I really didn't feel comfortable doing it, and I also didn't want to, so I told him I'm sorry, but no thanks. Then me and my brother started to walk away. The man said he understood, and then started to walk back up to his house. We went through the woods, which took us about 5 minutes to get back. When we had just about made it back, I was sure I heard someone walking behind us at a pretty far distance. I turned around, but I didn't see anything. My brother and I made it back inside just in time for dinner. As we sat down, our grandmother asked us how it was out in the yard. We told her how we had talked to the next-door neighbor. She looked surprised when we said this, and asked us which neighbor. We pointed in the direction and said the house next door. She told us that the house over there was vacant, and nobody had lived there in about a year. When she said that, it gave me the chills. I was so glad I said no to helping the man.
When I was younger, we used to go to my Uncle Rob's house for Thanksgiving. He lived about 30 minutes away, and I'm not sure what year this was, but I was maybe 12 or 13. I remember that my brother, sister, and parents left our house on Thanksgiving morning to go to my uncle's. After leaving our house, we got onto the roads, and things were pretty quiet. For the first part of the drive, everything was fine. It was about halfway through when my dad mentioned the car behind us. He was like, "Why is this guy following me?" At that point, we all looked behind us at the same time. There was a smaller SUV, silver color, that was behind us on the road. To that point, we had made maybe 3 or 4 turns. Apparently, it had been following us almost since our house. I hadn't even noticed. None of us had an answer. I thought that maybe it was just a coincidence. The car behind us was not right up on our bumper or anything. We also couldn't really tell who was driving at all because they weren't close enough. We kept going towards my uncle's. My uncle lived in a quiet neighborhood where the houses were pretty far spread out. I thought that there was no way this car behind us would keep following us there. But as we kept going, the car remained back behind us. We made several more turns and soon got into the city where my Uncle Rob lived. The car was still there. At that point, we thought that maybe it was another one of our relatives also going to Rob's. We didn't know all of the other kinds of cars that our family drove, so it was possible. Still, we were all very suspicious. When we finally got to my uncle's street, we now were driving much slower. The car was still behind us, and it stayed back at about the same distance as before. When we got to my Uncle Rob's driveway, my dad was considering to keep driving and try to lose the guy, but we ended up just pulling into the driveway. The car behind us kept going down the street and did not pull in after us. This was a relief. After getting to my uncle's, we went inside of his house. He had a big house and a big yard as well. That's why most of our family gatherings were held there. When you were inside of his place, there was not really a good view of the street out front, but you could see it a little bit if you were looking. I remember that a few of us, including myself, were in his living room watching football on TV. I was sitting on the far side of the room, right by the window. Occasionally, I would look out. At one point, I saw the same car that had followed us, driving by the opposite way, very slowly. We all had just chalked it up to be a coincidence. Maybe somebody who lived by us was going to one of my uncle's neighbors, or lived there. I found it interesting, but still not a big deal. Then, maybe 5 minutes later, I saw the car again. It was driving from the direction that it had gone minutes before. This time, it was going extremely slow. Then it came to a stop, just past my uncle's driveway. The car was stopped for maybe 30 seconds, and then it slowly drove away. I found this to be really odd, and I was the only person who noticed it. I got up, went and found my dad, and then told him about it. He found it interesting, but the car had driven away again, so there was not much that we could do. I went back to my seat in the living room, and we kept watching football. I got distracted, talking to a lot of people and stuff. Soon, we had Thanksgiving dinner in the dining room. After that, some of us went back to the living room to watch more football. By now, the sun had set. I was sitting in the same chair that I was at before. At one point, I thought I saw something from outside. It was hard to see anything because there weren't really any lights out there. But when I looked over, I was sure that I saw a man. He had gone behind a tree. I kept watching. A few seconds went by, and then this man ran out from the tree and went behind a bush about 20 feet away. I stood up from my chair and asked my cousin next to me if he had seen that. He had no clue what I was talking about. I started to tell him what I had just seen, and in that moment, somebody tried to open the back door to the house, which was right between the living room that we were in and the end of the kitchen. Thankfully, the door was locked. One of my uncles sitting in the living room sat up and said, "Did somebody go outside?" Nobody had gone outside. We were just looking at each other, confused. Then, one of my uncles got up and walked over to the window next to the door. He looked out of it, and he said that he saw a guy running away. He opened up the door and started to go outside. I looked back out the window that I was near, and then saw the man running behind another tree farther away. By now, everybody was standing and looking out windows and talking to each other about what was happening. Then I saw the car again. It drove away rather quickly down the street. Several people, including myself, went outside, even though it was pretty cold. We searched around the property a little bit, but the guy was gone. For the rest of that night that we were there, the man didn't come back. I didn't see the car either. My family left some time later and weren't followed or anything home. To this day, I still wonder who that was, why he followed us, and why he was prowling around my uncle's yard.
My family usually hosts Thanksgiving at our house. I live there with my wife, and typically our parents as well as siblings and some aunts and uncles will come. It's usually anywhere between 15 and 20 people there for Thanksgiving dinner. It's always a great time. So I remember that last year, family started coming over in the early afternoon. Very quickly, the house started to fill up with everyone. I was busy talking to people and helping my wife with the cooking. I remember that I walked back out from the kitchen to see the living room filled with people, but there was one random guy there who I did not know. I was very confused to see him. He was just standing amongst the people and kind of looking around. I went up to one of my uncles and asked him who the guy was. My uncle told me the guy was walking up the same time they arrived, and the guy told him that he was good friends with me. I said that I had no clue who he was. I decided that I had better ask him to leave or find out why he was in my house. So I started to walk over to the guy, except right when I did, he made eye contact with me and then started walking away. The guy went over to the stairs and then walked up them, and nobody else was upstairs at all. That's where a few bedrooms were, and that was pretty much it. I had a really bad feeling about this guy now. I walked up the stairs after him, and when I got up there, I wasn't sure where he had gone. All the doors up there were closed as they had been before. I called out asking who was there, but got no response. Then I tried the first door, which was a guest bedroom. It opened up and I looked around in the room, but could not find anyone. Then I went into the hallway again and down to our bedroom. When I got there, the door was locked. I realized that this is where the guy was. I knocked on the door and asked him to come out, but I got no response. I went back downstairs and told my wife about it, as well as a few other people. We decided to call the police, not knowing if the man was dangerous or what. He stayed locked in the bedroom the entire time. Eventually, the police came and got him out of there. I have no idea why the guy entered our house.
When I was a kid, we used to have the whole family over for Thanksgiving. One year, we were cleaning the house the night before Thanksgiving, and my parents were cooking some of the pies. It was a great smell throughout the house, but I was busy taking things from upstairs and putting them down in the basement so there would be more room for everyone up there. Our basement wasn't finished, but we had a lot of things down there, and even an area with a rug and a TV where we would play video games sometimes. My mom asked me to bring up a couple extra chairs that we also kept down there. I went to the back corner behind the stairs where they were. It was the creepiest part of the basement in my opinion because it was just way back and in the corner. As I reached a chair, I thought I heard a noise behind me. Then, about 6 feet to my right, next to a large box, I saw a person slowly crawl from behind the box to behind the refrigerator that was next to the stairs. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It looked like a man with long hair and baggy clothes. My first instinct was to run, but I knew that I would have to run past the man if I wanted to go back upstairs. So I did what the next best thing in my mind was, and that was to hide behind the chairs. I wanted to get back upstairs, but as far as I knew, the man was still behind the fridge. I waited there for what felt like an eternity. In reality, it was probably about 10 minutes. At last, I heard the door to upstairs open, and at first I was scared until I heard my mother call out asking to me what was taking so long. This made me feel a little more confident, so I walked out, and as I was talking to her, I said I would bring it right up. I grabbed the chairs and made my way upstairs. But to my surprise, when I got to the fridge, the man was gone. He must have somehow went somewhere else. I went back up the stairs, and as soon as I was completely up, I slammed the door shut and told my mom there was a man down there. When my dad heard this, he went downstairs to look around. He came back up about 5 minutes later saying there was nobody down there at all. I even went back down with him, and we couldn't find anyone. I felt crazy and as if I was imagining things. I thought maybe somehow the man had left, but I knew he wasn't down there anymore. I went to bed that night, still unsure of what had really happened. When I woke up on Thanksgiving morning, I went downstairs. I noticed I was the first one awake, so then I went to the basement door. When I did,
I saw the door was wide open. The front door to our house was also unlocked. When my parents got up, we all went downstairs to look around and saw nothing. Whoever was down there must have left in the night, and I no longer felt crazy. I did, though, feel a lot more creeped out. But how they avoided us the first time we went down there, I will never know.
This story happened a few years ago on Thanksgiving night. I was 20 years old and in college at the time. I remember that a lot of stores were opening on the night of Thanksgiving, and they were going to be open all night. My family was hosting Thanksgiving at our house, but I was planning to go Black Friday shopping with my best friend Jennifer later. We weren't going to be waiting in line or anything, but we're still planning to do a bit of shopping. At probably like 10 p.m., when most of the people had left our family gathering, Jennifer came over to my house. She lived just down the street, so she could walk there. Then we took my car and drove down to the local shopping center. This was an area that had tons of stores and restaurants, all within short distances of each other. When we got there, it was packed. A lot of stores had already opened, and I had never seen it so busy at this time of night. We first went to 2 different stores that were close to each other and got a few things. We were going to go to a couple of more places, and it was maybe midnight by now. As we were leaving Bath & Body Works, Jennifer quietly said to me that a guy had been following us around. I hadn't even noticed. I started to look behind me, and Jennifer stopped me. She said that he was just a little ways back. After leaving the store, we walked along a sidewalk in front of some other stores on a strip mall. We entered a coffee shop that happened to be open. When we went inside, the man did not immediately enter the coffee shop after us. As we waited in line, Jennifer told me that she noticed the man in the first store that we went to. She also saw him in Bath & Body Works, and he was by himself and always seemed to be walking a ways behind us. I guess that Jennifer is a more observant person than me, because I hadn't noticed. I was too busy shopping. We both got some coffee and then sat down at a table in the back corner of the coffee shop. It was decently busy because of all the other shoppers out. Shortly after sitting down, we both witnessed the man who Jennifer had talked about entering the coffee shop. She pointed him out to me, and he came walking in and then made eye contact for a second. He was kind of short, had short blonde hair, and was thin. He got into the back of the line. After standing there for a few seconds, the guy then turned and started walking over to us. He approached our table and then said hi and asked us how we were doing. Then he turned specifically to me and asked me for my number. I told him that I had a boyfriend, even though I didn't. It was really awkward, but he seemed to take it pretty well. He just said okay, and then turned and walked out of the coffee shop. We watched from the window as he walked out and then got inside a car. He did not immediately drive away, though. As Jennifer and I talked and sat inside of the coffee shop, occasionally we looked over. The guy did not drive away and still seemed to be inside of his car. At least, his car was still there. It was far away, but something about him definitely seemed suspicious. After a little while, Jennifer and I decided to go to another store that was within walking distance. We left the coffee shop and then walked along the sidewalk back over to where some of the stores were. As we were walking along that sidewalk, we looked back just to be safe. But when we did, we saw the man get out of his car. He started walking in our direction. He was a long ways back, but it seemed pretty clear that he was going to keep following us. We kept walking along the sidewalk and decided to go into the largest store in that immediate area, which was a Target. It took probably almost 10 minutes to walk there, and the man remained a ways back walking the entire time. When we got inside of the Target, it was extremely busy. Soon, though, we saw the man enter the store after us. This was just really creepy. We looked in his direction, and I made eye contact with him again briefly. He looked away, acting like he wasn't following us. I wondered if he actually thought we hadn't noticed. I mean, I hadn't noticed at first, but now it was really obvious. Jennifer and I decided to leave. We were really tired of this creep trailing us. We walked through the entire store, trying to blend in with the crowd. The pace that we were walking at was pretty fast. We made it all the way around the store and back over to the doors. Then, we went outside, and we both just started running. We were basically sprinting, trying to make it as hard as possible for the guy to keep up with us. It took us about 2 or 3 minutes to make it to my car, which was not in the same parking lot that the man's was at. We both got inside, and then I started the engine and drove away. After leaving the parking lot, we got onto the road and did not see the man at all after that. We got back to my house safely, and I felt lucky that nothing had happened. We both couldn't believe how long that guy had followed us for. It was definitely one of the creepiest things to ever happen to me, and I'm glad that Jennifer noticed him when she did.
I used to work at Target. This was around 5 years ago. I mostly worked on the sales floor, but was also trained to be a cashier and do some other stuff. One year, I was scheduled to work on Black Friday. Target opened at 6 p.m. on Thanksgiving night, and because at the time I was still in high school and had just turned 18 years old, I got off by 10 p.m. It was nice to only have to work for about 4 hours, and I clocked in that night at about 5:45 p.m. When I got there, I saw that there was already a line outside, and the parking lot was nearly full. I went inside through the employee-only entrance. When I got inside, I immediately saw that just about everybody we had was working. I had worked there for about 6 months at the time, and knew most of all the other employees because of working on the sales floor, and also sometimes cashiering. I would see just about everybody, and I said hi to a bunch of people that I knew. I even saw some faces that I didn't recognize. I'm sure there were some new seasonal workers and other people who normally didn't work the same times as me. All of our managers were working as well, and I figured that we wouldn't have a problem with the Black Friday rush. However, when the doors were unlocked and a bunch of people rushed into the store, things got really busy fast. I quickly found myself doing many different tasks, and time was flying by. I was helping customers find things, picking up items people had left places and putting them back where they belong, and for a short time I cashiered. I think we had every single lane in the store open, which I had never seen before. After a few hours, I was near the back of the store, organizing one of the many shelves that had been messed up. We were still really busy, but not quite as busy as we had been in the hour or so after opening. Another employee came into my aisle and asked if I had a second. I looked up and saw a guy that I didn't recognize. He must have been one of the new seasonal guys. The Target name tag on his red shirt said, Michael. I said, sure, what do you need? He said to me that he was new and this was like his 4th day working, and he wasn't really sure how to handle a situation. I said I could try to help and asked him what the situation was. Michael said he would show me, and we walked out of the aisle. Then we walked past several customers and through a door on the side of the store leading to the back room area that we had. Back there, we just had products that hadn't made it to the sales floor yet. We were on the side of the store opposite from grocery, so it was quieter back there. After we walked back, we went through an exit door leading to the outside. Then, Michael walked out, and I followed. When we had made it now outside of the store, I was very confused. Outside the store, there was a little sidewalk, a small grass area with trees planted here and there, and then there was a quiet road. When I was out there, I noticed there was a car parked on the side of the road right next to where we were. Michael said, I'm trying to help these customers. I asked who they were, and I was interrupted by the doors of the car opening. It was a typical 4-door car, which was black, and I saw 2 men get out from the front seats. They were fairly large, and both had hats and sunglasses on, as well as gloves. The gloves weren't too strange because it was cold out, but the sunglasses sure were. I then felt myself being grabbed near the top of my arms, just below my shoulders, by Michael, who was behind me. He started pushing me towards the 2 men and the car. I asked what was going on and what he was doing. I couldn't believe this was actually happening. Get in the car, Michael said. It took a few seconds for me to kind of grasp the situation. The men seemed like they were coming over to help Michael get me inside their car. I struggled, but Michael's grip was strong. I started screaming and kicked out with my feet at Michael's ankles. It felt like I got him really good on the shin. This caused him to let go of me and almost fall to the ground. When this happened, both of the men started running to stop me. I turned around and sprinted towards the door, but quickly realized that it would be locked. The doors were rarely used and always locked from the outside. I realized then that I would have to try and outrun these men around to the front side of the store. I kept sprinting along the side, but could tell that the other men were gaining on me. I changed directions and then started running out into the street. Michael had gotten up and was now running after me as well. I was screaming like a crazy person and running to try to get away. When they were within probably 5 feet of me, I barely made it to the parking lot and saw a car that appeared to be driving in our direction. I ran right towards it and it honked at me. However, the men chasing me didn't want to grab me right in front of somebody else, at least that's what I figured. Instead, the men just kind of stood back and watched. I ran to the driver's door and yelled for them to call the police. Whoever was driving the car must have been super confused, but when the men heard me saying this, they started to leave. From there, I was able to go back inside the Target store. Police were called, and I told them everything I could. Unfortunately, the men did get away. Michael, if that was even his name, didn't even work there. I guess it's not too hard to find a red shirt and khakis and get a hold of a Target name tag. On Black Friday, nobody would really suspect him because of how busy it was. Our store did have security cameras, so I'm hoping that he was caught, whoever he was. I'm just glad I was able to get away.
Thanksgiving had always been a family affair at my grandparents' small farm. As a teenager, I found the gatherings increasingly boring each year. I was not interested in listening to adults talk about things which I found boring at the time. After an early Thanksgiving dinner, I felt restless and announced to my parents that I was going to wander the property. I just wanted some time to myself outside of the house. Eventually, I arrived at the old barn on the property. My grandparents didn't use it much anymore, and it was mainly used for storage. The barn door was old, but surprisingly easy to open. My grandparents never locked it since there wasn't anything valuable inside, I guess. Inside the barn, it was pitch black, so I had to use my phone's flashlight. The light illuminated tons of old tools and cobwebs that clung to the rafters. I was starting to enjoy myself as it was fun and spooky exploring the old barn. On a workbench lay a small hatchet. It was an old metal rusty one covered in dried blood. They don't have animals on the farm currently, but I recalled how my grandparents used to butcher animals on the farm. It didn't feel unusual to see such a tool here, even though the blood made me uneasy. I kept exploring the barn, and eventually made my way up the stairs to the loft. It was mostly just old hay up there, and I was about to turn back down the stairs when I stepped on something under the hay. As I moved some hay to the side with my foot, what I discovered almost made me tumble backwards down the stairs. I'd uncovered the empty eye sockets of a long dead corpse staring blankly at me. I sprinted back into the house, interrupting the conversation and telling everybody what I had found in the barn. After my dad and uncle came out with me to confirm it, my grandparents called the sheriff. The body had been there for about 3 years with multiple hatchet wounds, an investigation revealed. The realization hit me hard. I had picked up and touched the murder weapon earlier when I was checking out the old tools. My grandparents were in shock that they had lived on the farm for a few years without knowing that somebody was dead in their barn. They couldn't identify the body other than that it was a man, and the investigation dragged on, but no leads surfaced. To this day, nobody knows who killed him or why. A few years ago, I had to work on Thanksgiving night. This was a while back, and Target opened their doors at 6 p.m. on Thanksgiving. I know that Walmart was opening at the same time, so I figured that's why they did as well. When I first got the schedule and saw that I was working Thanksgiving, I was really disappointed. I did not want to have to leave my family get-together early, but at least I'd be getting paid time and a half. I was working from 6 p.m. to midnight, so it wasn't too bad. My Target store was pretty large and was expecting quite a few people there, so I remember that I left Thanksgiving and drove to work. When I got there was already a line. I went inside and was assigned a check lane to work at. I realized then that we had more people working at once than I had ever seen before. Every check lane was open and there was a worker at it, and there were employees that I had never seen before who were working that night. When the doors opened, customers rushed inside, mostly to the electronics department. The store was soon packed, and I was kept very busy ringing up person after person. The time went by pretty quickly, and after a few hours, I took my break, and then I returned to work. I finished working the rest of my shift, and then at midnight, I was off. I remember that I left my check lane and walked over to clock out. It was the busiest that I had ever seen a Target store at midnight. Customers were still everywhere. I went in and clocked out and then left. I had parked in the back side of the parking lot because of it being so busy, and there were still cars all around the place. When I had almost reached my vehicle though, I saw another guy approaching me wearing a Target uniform. He was a coworker, but I did not recognize him. But basically everybody was working on Black Friday, so that didn't really surprise me. The guy said hi to me as I was walking to my car, and I said hi back to him. He appeared to be around my age, had blonde hair, and was kind of short. He then asked me if I would be able to give him a ride home, saying that he didn't have one. He also added that he didn't live very far away. I didn't know this guy, but because he was a coworker, I said yes. He then told me the direction that he lived, and it wasn't too far out of the way. So he hopped into my car and I got in and began driving. We left the busy Target, crossed a nearby highway, and went down a much quieter road. The guy directed me to his neighborhood not too far off of that road. This area was a little bit more rural. The houses had lots of trees in the front yards and things like that. I remember that about halfway down this really quiet street, the guy told me to turn into a driveway of the next house. I did, to see that it was a pretty typical looking place with a narrow driveway to the left and trees scattered around the front yard. I parked towards the end of the driveway and stopped the car. The guy seemed to take his time getting out of it though. He said thanks for the ride, and then he asked me when the next time I worked was. I found this a little bit odd because I had never even worked with him before, but maybe he just happened to be really new though, so I told him when I worked next. He then went on his phone for a few seconds before starting to open his door slowly. But as he did that, an SUV suddenly appeared and pulled into the driveway from behind us. It stopped there, completely blocking me in the driveway. I was surprised by this and did not know who it was. Now the guy got out of my car, and I saw the doors to the SUV behind me opening as well. Two men then got out of it, and they both started walking towards my side of the car. The guy who I had given a ride to then told me to get out of the car. I didn't know why, and I didn't want to. The men heading towards my car seemed kind of sketchy. With the passenger's door still open, the guy stood there with the other men approaching. Both of the men went to my driver's side, and one of them tried opening my door, with the other trying to open my rear door. Luckily, both of them were locked. At this point, I didn't know what to do, but I knew that I had to get away from them. I hit the gas, going farther up the driveway. Then I turned to the right and started driving through their front yard. Luckily, my car didn't get stuck or anything. I then cut through the yard, went around the guy's SUV, and then back out onto the street. Then I quickly drove away and went home. Soon after, I found out that the guy did not work at Target at all. It was all a setup. I reported it to the police, and I'm really glad that I got away from there.
My name is Rachel, and this story happened just last year when we were hosting Thanksgiving at our house. I live in a 2-story house with my husband, and we were going to be having about 20 people over. We were mostly prepared for all of the guests, and had done some shopping for food and things earlier in the week. We had cleaned the house, and people were supposed to start arriving at about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. At about 11 a.m., we realized that we did not have enough drinks. We were not sure what to do at first, with all the stores being closed for Thanksgiving, but there was a chain of gas stations that was open 24/7 and had a good variety of things. We realized that we should be able to quick go and get some there. I sent my husband out to go buy them, while I started to prepare some food. A few minutes after he left, I had a few minutes, and I went downstairs into the basement to get some extra folding chairs. We would need them for the number of guests that we were expecting for dinner. As I was downstairs, trying to see how many of these chairs I could pick up at once, I heard the front door to our house open and close. My husband definitely was not back so soon, and if this was him, I expected him to say something. I realized that some of our guests must have come early, but they weren't supposed to show up for almost 2 hours. With a chair in each hand, I started to walk up the staircase, but a few steps in, and I heard whoever had come inside the house was now walking upstairs to the 2nd floor. Plus, they hadn't said anything at all. Now, if this was one of our guests, they wouldn't just walk upstairs, and they would likely call out saying hi or something. I suddenly got a really bad feeling. I took out my phone and texted my husband asking him if he had just entered the house. He responded quickly, telling me that he had just arrived at the gas station. My bad feeling got worse. Somebody was inside of our house and had gone upstairs. My husband told me that he was on his way back, which made me feel slightly better, but I knew it would still be a few minutes. There was still a slim chance, though, that it was family or a neighbor. We were pretty friendly with our next-door neighbors, and they had come over a few times. They weren't the type to just barge in, though. I quietly went upstairs from the basement, and then opened up the door at the top of the stairs. I took a few steps into the hallway, when I heard somebody starting to come down the stairs. They would soon be in my sight. I had a really bad feeling, and I didn't want whoever it was to see me. I quickly ran back down the basement stairs, and when I got downstairs, I went into the bathroom off my husband's man cave type of room. Then I locked myself inside of it. Minutes went by, and inside of the bathroom, I couldn't hear anything that was going on upstairs. My mind was racing, and I was starting to panic. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, I heard footsteps coming down the basement stairs. I knew that my husband wasn't home yet. I went to the back of the bathroom, as far from the door as I could. The footsteps seemed to go right over to the bathroom, and then they tried opening the door. I had locked it, and after it didn't open, there was a light knock on the door. I didn't move, and whoever was on the other side didn't say anything. Several seconds went by. Then my phone vibrated. It was my husband letting me know that he was back. I told him that somebody was in the basement, and then I dialed 911. I didn't hear whoever was at the door walk away, so I knew that they were still right on the other side. When the 911 operator answered the phone, I told them that somebody was in our house. As I was on the line with them, I heard my husband's voice from the top of the stairs. He shouted, asking who was down here. I heard whoever was on the other side of the door run away in another direction. At that point, I just bolted for the door, opened it up, and sprinted for the stairs. It had to be the fastest that I ran in my life. I went all the way up the stairs and made it to my husband. I told him that I called the cops, and we both left our house and went outside to my husband's truck. We waited in the truck in the driveway for the police to get there. They arrived about 10 minutes later. After entering and searching our house, they were able to successfully locate a man. They left the house with him, and he was one of the creepiest guys I had ever seen. To that point, though, I had never seen him before and didn't recognize who he was. We were just happy that he was found. Apparently, he had been hiding behind our basement couch. I'm not sure why he was there, or if he thought nobody was home when he went inside, but that was one of the most terrifying experiences of my life.
Several years back, I remember that many stores used to open at 6 p.m. on Thanksgiving Day. During this time, I was in my early 20s and in college, and I had only gone out shopping on Thanksgiving one other time, and that was at around midnight. But on this year in particular, my family was hosting Thanksgiving at our house, and my friend who lived down the street was also having family over. We decided that the two of us would go shopping that night, not long after the stores opened. Our families would have dinner at about 3 or 4, so by 6 we could leave and then come back. The only reason we went was because we were hoping to get new phones that were going on sale for super cheap. There were a few other things that we were interested in buying too, but that was the main attraction. So a bunch of family members came over to my family's house in the late morning and early afternoon. By about 5:30 p.m., most people were still there, but I left to go Black Friday shopping. I met up with my friend, and we drove down to the local shopping center, which is about 5 to 10 minutes away. After getting there, we started doing some shopping. We were not planning on being out that late at all. Both of us were able to get the new phones that we wanted, and we went to Target, Walmart, and a couple of other stores. Everywhere that we went was very busy as expected. Then at like 8 o'clock, we drove back home. My friend and I went to my house, and we then went inside. My friend knew my family pretty well, so we all just kind of hung out in the house. There were still some of my aunts and uncles and people there, but not too many. Not long after getting back, though, I remember noticing a car parked out front on the side of the road that I didn't recognize. The engine was running, and the lights were on. It had parked between 2 other cars of family members that were there. I watched for a little while out of curiosity. Within about a minute, the driver's door opened, and a man got out. I watched him then leave the car, and I did not have any idea who he was. The man started walking into the yard, and I was sure that he was going to knock on our front door or something. But instead of going up to the front step, he walked around towards the back of the house. I was very confused. I thought that maybe he was going to the neighbors, because the houses are pretty close to each other, and the neighbors might have been having people over for Thanksgiving. I didn't really know. So I thought it was strange, but I wasn't really creeped out or anything. But then I headed over towards the dining room to get a snack. It was then that I saw the figure of somebody outside approaching the back door. I also realized that the back door was unlocked, probably because people had been using it to go in and out during the day. I sprinted over to the door and I locked it, just before whoever it was arrived and tried opening it. I then noticed that it was the same man. He then walked away from the door after seeing me in the window. I went back around to the front, and a short time later saw the man enter his car and then drive away. I talked to a few people about it and figured that maybe somebody had followed us home from the shopping area. Why, I don't know, but I can't think of any other explanation for it. Back when I was in college, I would go home each year for Thanksgiving. I remember that we were going to my grandparents' house along with a bunch of other family members. But beforehand, I went to visit one of my friends from high school on Wednesday, the day before Thanksgiving. My mom texted me when I was on the way back, asking if I could pick up a few things at the supermarket. So I stopped at the one that was closest to our house. By now, it was about 6 p.m. or so. When I got there, it was extremely busy. I parked at the far back end of the parking lot because of this, and then I walked inside. I didn't have to get that much stuff, just a few items, but I didn't really know where they were. I remember walking around the store, and at one point, despite it being very crowded, I noticed this one woman staring at me. It was really strange to say the least. She was just standing sort of on the edge of the store near the frozen food, and just looking at me like a laser. I did not know why, because I certainly did not recognize her at all. I looked away and continued with the shopping. When I was at another part of the store completely, I saw the woman again. She was once more seeming to be doing nothing but staring in my direction. I found this very odd, but I did not want to go confront her or anything. I tried to just stick with my shopping list. The store was very crowded, so it took me a while to get everything, but I soon did. Then I went to the front of the store, waited in line, and then checked out. In this time period, I did not see the lady who had been staring at me. Then I left the store and walked out to my car in the parking lot. I put the groceries in the back and then got inside the driver's door. It was shortly after getting in and right after I started my engine when I heard a knock at the front passenger's window. I looked over to find the same woman who had been staring at me from the store. She was knocking on my window like she really wanted to tell me something, so I rolled it down, curious as to what she wanted. I was thinking that maybe I would get an explanation as to why she had been staring at me. However, the woman then held up a $20 bill and said that I had dropped it. I was very confused and pretty sure that I did not drop a 20 at all. I asked if she was sure, and she said yes, and she had seen me dropping it in the parking lot. I didn't even think that I had any 20s on me, and I never really carried much cash. By now, I was 99% sure that she was lying. I said no, I did not drop a 20, and by now the woman was holding the bill inside of my window to hand it to me. I did not take it though. I told the woman that it wasn't mine. Her head was basically inside of my car, and her hand was just a couple of feet away from me as she leaned in. After I told her that it wasn't mine, she did not back up though. Instead, the woman then started to crawl inside of my window and into my car. It was very strange. However, she was small and petite and was able to fit. In a quick decision, I just turned the keys back, shutting off the engine. Then I took the keys out of the ignition. I then left my car and started walking away. The woman got inside of my car, and I walked a distance back and took out my phone to call the police. As I stood there and watched my car, about a minute went by before I saw the woman get out and then run away. After that, I returned to my car, went inside and locked the doors and waited for the police. They came out, but the woman was gone by the time they got there. I told them what happened, and I really don't know what the woman was trying to do. She didn't steal anything from inside my car, although I didn't really have anything worth stealing. I think she was probably going to try to steal the car itself, or else make me drive her someplace or something. Really, I have no idea. After that though, I went home, and I have not seen the woman since.
I used to work at a smaller retail clothing store a few years back. We didn't have a whole lot of employees, and usually the store was fairly quiet. I enjoyed working there at the time, and I worked there for a total of 1 year. I was there for one holiday season, and it all started with Black Friday. Normally, we were open at 9 a.m., but on Black Friday, we were going to be opening at 6 a.m. There would be 5 of us working at once instead of the usual 2 or 3. We were having a sale, but it was not like a crazy sale that you would knock down the doors for. Nobody was going to be camping out outside or anything. We were more so taking advantage of all the people that would be in the area by opening early. We were located right in the middle of a large shopping center, and there would be lots of people in the area. I was working from open at 6 a.m. to 12 p.m. I got to work bright and early, and things were not too bad for the first couple of hours. We were certainly busier than usual, but nothing that we couldn't handle, especially with 5 of us working. As the day went on though, the store got busier. I was mostly working at the registers and ringing up customers. Soon, it was time for my break. We had a really small break room that was at the back of the store. Back there was a hallway, with a bathroom on one side and a break room on the other. Inside the break room, there was just a couple of tables and chairs and a TV. When I took my break, I was the only person in there, which was expected. It felt good to get off my feet and relax for a little bit. I had been going non-stop for a while. Mostly, I just went on my phone during the break. But when my break was over and I went to leave the break room and go back to work, the door wouldn't open. I tried, and I just couldn't get it. I couldn't tell if the door was broke or if somebody was holding it shut or something. At that point, I texted one of my coworkers who was working. I asked her to come to the break room, telling her that I didn't know why, but I couldn't open the door. Then, I went back down and sat at the table. Suddenly, the door opened. I expected to see a coworker, but instead, I saw this random guy. He didn't work here, but I had seen him earlier inside the store. I remembered that. He was a big guy, probably over 6 feet tall, and weighing at least 200 pounds. He also had a beard, and took a couple of steps into the room without saying anything. I started to tell the guy that this was an employees-only room, and customers were not allowed. He ignored me and walked faster in my direction. When he got really close, I stood up and backed away. The way that he was approaching me was really suspicious, especially with him not saying anything. When I moved back, he started to lunge at me. There was an emergency exit there in the break room. Nobody ever used it, and I wasn't sure if an alarm would go off or something if I did. But now it was the time to use it. I ran for the door and opened it up. I didn't hear an alarm or anything, but it did open, and when I got outside, the man started to grab me. We both left the building and were in a side parking lot. It was a much quieter area to park, and not as many people were over here. The man grabbed me by both of my arms up near my shoulders. He was much larger than I was, and I struggled to get away. I started to yell, but he quickly covered up my mouth. I was struggling as much as I could, but we were slowly moving farther away from the store. As we were getting closer to the cars, I heard my coworker suddenly start yelling. She was standing in the opening of the doorway that we had left through. We were now about 30 or 40 feet away from her. The man was trying to get me to his car, which appeared to only be about 10 feet away from us now. My coworker was yelling like crazy, telling the man to let me go. I hadn't seen anybody at all in that particular area of the parking lot, but soon some others showed up. When we made it to the guy's car and he was about to open the doors, I heard more voices. I briefly saw some people coming from around the corner and another person come out the door that my coworker was standing at. The man then suddenly let me go, shoving me away, and I fell to the ground. He then got inside of his car quickly and sped off. As he did, several people reached me. 3 men and 2 women had come from both around the corner of the store and from the break room. I guess the yelling had caused a commotion, and people nearby found out about it just in the nick of time. The man had gotten away, but multiple witnesses had already called the police. They had his description, and I was also okay and free from him. We went back inside the store, and after the police got there, I talked with them for a while. I got the rest of the day off work, and some time off after that as well. The police were also able to locate the man based on all of the information. I feel extremely lucky to have narrowly escaped what could have been a really bad situation. I'm really grateful to my coworker and to all of the people who stopped to help me. I haven't worked a Black Friday since.
This happened when I was about 13 years old. I remember that year for Thanksgiving, we were going to be having it at our house. People were going to start coming over in the afternoon, and my parents were up late preparing food the night before, and my sister and I were helping clean the house. We had a 2-story house, and all of the bedrooms were upstairs. Downstairs was the main living room, the kitchen, dining room, and a few others. Our house was sort of big, and it was a good place to have a bunch of people over. I remember that before going to bed, my parents mentioned how they had to get up early to get more foods ready for the day. After we had all gone to bed, and the next morning came, I was woken up by my mom. She told me that both her and my dad were going to go to the store quick to buy a couple of last-minute ingredients that they hadn't realized they were out of. I was really groggy from my sleep and being interrupted. It must have been like 7 a.m. or so. I remember my mom saying she just wanted to let me know and they would be back soon, then she left. I instantly turned over and fell back asleep. Probably like 30 minutes later or so, my alarm went off and I woke up. I was a little bit more rested and awake now. I got out of bed and into the hallway to use the bathroom. When I did, I noticed that my sister's bedroom door was open and she didn't appear to be inside of it. I could sort of hear the TV playing downstairs and I figured that she was already up. I used the bathroom and then went downstairs. It was clean and the sunlight lit up most of the space. In the living room, the TV was playing and on the Thanksgiving Day parade. I looked around for my sister, but she was nowhere to be seen. I went into the kitchen, but she wasn't there either. I guess maybe she had gone with my parents to the store, and I returned to the living room towards the couch. Then I heard a noise. It sounded like a whisper. I got really startled, and then I heard it again. It was my sister's voice, and it sounded like she was behind the couch. I looked behind it and saw her. She was all crouched up into almost a ball and looked terrified. She just whispered to me that there was a man in the house and told me to hide. I quickly went behind a sort of lazy boy chair that was next to the couch in the living room. I whispered to my sister, asking where the man was. She said she didn't know, but when she came downstairs, she saw a guy in the kitchen. Just then, we both heard a noise. It was coming from the hallway near the front door. I looked out from behind the chair I was hiding behind, and I saw a guy walking into the living room. He was tall and wore a black sweatshirt. He also had on a hat, but I didn't get a good look at his face. I quickly but quietly tried to move back behind the chair so that the guy couldn't see me. I heard him walk around the living room and the footsteps got closer. They came within maybe 15 feet of where my sister and I were hiding. I was terrified and my heart felt like it was going to beat out of my chest. It's a good thing the TV was playing, or I feel like the man would have definitely heard us. I heard him walk farther away and seemingly into the kitchen. The kitchen was farther away from the front door. I felt like maybe my sister and I could get away if the man was in there. I whispered to my sister and told her to follow me. We counted to 3 and then got out and ran as fast and also as quietly as we could to the front door. The area the man was in the kitchen was sort of blocked off from seeing us. We didn't look back to see if he heard us or saw us. When we made it to the front door, I unlocked it and opened it as fast as I could. Then we both rushed out the door and into the driveway. Right after we got outside, we saw our parents' car driving down the street and pulling in. It was great to see, and we both ran out to them. They barely had a chance to get in the driveway and seemed really confused to see us running out of the house. We got inside the back seats of the car and told them about seeing a guy inside the house. They ended up calling the police from the car as we sat in the driveway. We drove down the street a little ways because my sister didn't feel safe even being in the driveway. The police showed up pretty quickly. When they did, they entered the house and emerged roughly 10 minutes later with the man. It was a huge relief to see that he was caught. Apparently, they found him hiding upstairs in my bedroom closet. That part of it really freaked me out. I'm so glad that I got up when I did. I guess when my parents left, they forgot to lock the door that led from the garage to the house because the front door was locked when I went outside and the door to the garage wasn't. But how the guy got inside our garage in the first place, we never really found out.
This is something that happened years ago. On that year in particular, I remember that many stores were opening their doors right at midnight on Black Friday. Normally, I was not one to camp out and wait in line, but on that year in particular, I decided to. For a few days leading up to Thanksgiving, I'd been talking with my friend Sam about it. He really wanted to because there were some great deals at some stores, Best Buy in particular. So by Thanksgiving, we ended up deciding that we would. After the Thanksgiving get-togethers with our families, we both met up at about 9 p.m., a whole 3 hours before the doors opened. We went to the shopping center near where we lived, which had just about every major store in the area. After Sam and I arrived at Best Buy, there were already some people in line, but not too many. I would say maybe 50 people or so in front of us. Sam brought some folding chairs for us to sit in, and then we just waited and talked. It got cold sitting out there, but people soon got in line behind us, and by 11:30 at night there were probably at least 100 people behind us. The main thing that I was hoping to get was a laptop, and Sam was getting one as well.
but Sam also wanted to buy a TV because they had one that was on sale for a really great deal. So eventually, it was midnight, and we heard cheering from up front in the line, and we saw the doors open up. Things were pretty civil, and people rushed inside, but at a fast walk. Nobody was sprinting or knocking each other over or anything. We made it inside quickly, and then went straight for the laptops. Personally, I didn't realize how much everyone was trying to buy these same laptops that I wanted to get. I knew they were a great deal, but I figured that they would probably be available for several hours at least. However, when we got to the laptops, Sam grabbed one and I did the same. I then saw many other people crowded around and start taking them. I realized how lucky we were to have gotten there when we did. So I took my laptop and Sam took his, and we started heading over to the TVs where Sam would get one. The store by this point was completely crowded with a ton of people, and it was only getting busier. As Sam and I made our way to the TVs and were about halfway there, I remember somebody tried grabbing my laptop. I had been holding it in my right hand and did not have a very secure grasp on it. I felt somebody come up right behind me and then tug on it. I almost let go, but thankfully I didn't, and I quickly turned and grabbed it with my other hand as well. There was a brief tug-of-war contest that lasted for about 2 seconds, and I maintained control of the laptop. I looked, and I saw this shorter man with dark hair who was the guy who had tried grabbing it, but after letting go, he turned around and quickly went back into the crowd and out of my sight. I didn't get a real good look at him. I was glad that I still had the laptop, so I turned and now held it like a football, securing my arm around it. I hurried to catch up with Sam, who didn't realize what had happened. Soon we both arrived at the TVs, and Sam was also able to get one of them before they sold out. Then we started making our way back through the crowd up to the check lanes. Obviously, this would take longer than usual. I tried to hold on tight to the laptop. Well, almost halfway up to the check lanes, I felt somebody try grabbing it again. The back part of the box was exposed, and that's what they tried pulling on. This time, the tug from behind was much harder and forceful. Fortunately, I had a pretty good grip on it, and I still almost let go of it, but I didn't. I then quickly turned around and I saw that it was the same guy. He was standing right there in the crowd. I remember that he looked angry for a moment, and then he started laughing, almost as if to say he was just messing with me. But I knew that he wasn't. I knew he was really trying to take the laptop from me, but after that, he quickly turned around and blended in with the crowd again. There were so many other people around, I'm not even sure if anyone else noticed. But when I turned back, I saw that Sam had seen it, at least part of it. He asked me if that guy had tried taking my laptop. I said yes, and told him how he had tried to take it before as well. We guarded our items defensively and made the rest of the way up to the checkouts. If somebody had been able to take our items from us before we checked out, it wasn't stealing because they weren't paid for yet. So if they were able to take it, they could just walk up and then buy it instead of us buying it. And the store was so busy that even if we found an employee to complain about it, there's a chance that they wouldn't be able to do anything. So thankfully, we got to the checkout line and it moved pretty quickly. We were able to buy the items, and after paying for them, we left the store. In the parking lot, people were still walking in and out, but I had parked in the back and it was pretty quiet over there. As we walked past the cars through the parking lot, I remember that I was talking with Sam about what happened in more detail. As I did, I turned around and I saw the same guy now leaving the store and walking in our direction. He did not have anything in his hands, such as a bag from the store or an item that he bought. I told Sam that was him, and after seeing the guy quickly leaving the store, we decided to walk faster to make it to the car. Like I said, we were way in the back of the parking lot. So we started walking fast, and a few moments later, I looked back again. The guy was still heading towards us. Maybe he was just also going to his car and happened to park by us, but I didn't want to take the chance. Soon we were able to make it to my car, and there were a few open parking spaces around us because we were literally in the far back corner. After we put our items in the back seat, we went around and got into the front. I was driving, and after closing my door and locking it, I saw in the mirror the man now reaching my vehicle. He walked behind it, but did not go past it. He just kind of stopped right there. We could not leave until he moved out of the way. I remember Sam asking what the guy was doing. I had no idea. He continued to just stand there for at least over a minute. He wasn't really looking at us, but just kind of casually standing around, just a few feet from the back of my car. Then he turned and did start looking at us for a few moments. Sam rolled down his window slightly and asked the man what was going on. The man then turned and started walking around to Sam at the passenger's window. Before he got there though, he tried opening the back door to the car really quickly. Now that he was no longer blocking my way to back up, as he was reaching Sam at the front passenger side, I hit the gas and reversed out of the spot. We left the guy standing there near our parking space. After that, we left the parking lot and got out of there. We went to a couple more stores briefly and then made it back to our homes safely. Looking back, that was the craziest experience I've ever had on Black Friday. I really don't know why that guy kept trying to take my laptop. Possibly he had tried taking laptops from multiple people is my guess, but when he followed us out to the parking lot, it was really strange. On Black Friday of 2016, I went to Walmart to see the deals that they had. There were a number of things that I was interested in getting. Nothing too big like a TV, but a few small things and some Christmas gifts for people. I went there at about midnight, and the store was pretty busy. It was really weird to see a store that crowded at midnight. I looked around, but it was tough to get around the store with it being so crowded. At one point, I was back by the doors to the back room. They had a little window in them, and I randomly was just looking through it to the back rooms. As I did, I noticed someone walking into the back, but they were not a Walmart worker. They wore a ski mask and all black. I thought it had to be some sort of joke or something. There was a worker standing nearby, so I decided to let him know. I told him there was a guy in the back wearing a ski mask. He looked surprised and then asked me to show him where he was. I pointed in the window, and he opened the door and asked me where. We both went inside the back room. It got a lot quieter back there, as there were finally no crowds. I looked in the direction that the man went, and I explained that he was walking that way. Just as I took a few steps in that direction, I felt someone grab me from behind and cover my eyes with their hand. They seemed to be wearing gloves. Then I felt someone else grab my legs, and next thing I knew, I was being picked up by at least 2 people. They carried me a little ways, and then dropped me into what felt like one of those big garbage cans on wheels. I fell onto a bag of garbage. I looked up and saw 2 men in ski masks. They started pushing me and told me to shut up. I wondered how this was going on with no employees seeing this. I couldn't see much, but I saw that we were passing by an open door leading to outside. I don't know what got into me, but at that moment, I felt there was something I had to do. So I jumped against the side, causing the garbage can that I was in to tip over. I fell out of it and got up and began running. I felt the men right on my heels, and once I made it out the door, I took a left for the front end of the store. We were at the side where there was no people, so I ran as fast as I could, and once I made it back to the front, the men stopped chasing me. I ran straight to my car and drove all the way home. Once there, I called the police. I know I should have called them sooner, but my mind was racing, and I was just desperate to get back home where I felt safe. By the time I called, however, I was told there had been other calls about the men in ski masks at that Walmart. I don't know what those men were up to, but I'm so happy I was able to get away. Many years ago, I used to work at an electronics store that would get really busy on Black Friday. For most of the year, the store would not be very busy at all. It was a smaller place, and many of them were in malls. Our location was not inside of a mall, but was part of a strip mall. So most of the time, we would really only have 1 or 2 employees working, and wouldn't get that many customers at once. There were a few days though where we needed more, such as certain weekend sales, the Christmas season, and of course, Black Friday. We opened that year on Black Friday very early in the morning. I don't recall if it was 5 a.m., 6, or 7, but it was earlier than usual. I was opening the store along with 3 other employees. The setup of the store was basically items all along the walls, with a few display tables and more things for sale on them. There was also a couple of shelves, but not very many. Then we had our employee desk that had just 2 registers on it, and then there was a small backroom area in the store as well. We had put up a line divider thing to make there be an organized line of people waiting to check out, and then we had both registers open. The other 2 employees would be out in the store, helping customers and doing whatever else was needed, as the other 2 rang people up.
When we opened, we got a lot of customers pretty much right away. Our store was having a major sale. The crowds were not overwhelming, but were significant. For the first couple of hours, I was one of the employees working at the register and checking out customers. Then I was assigned to help customers inside of the store. The time went by really fast because I was kept pretty busy. I remember that at one point though, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a man walking into our back room. That space was for employees only, and normally the door was always locked, but it must have been left unlocked because this guy had just walked right in. I made my way over there to tell the guy that he couldn't be back there, but it took a little bit longer than usual because of how crowded the store was. I soon got back there though and entered the back room. It was a very small area but kind of cluttered. There were 2 doors leading to the store, one that I had just walked through and the other leading to behind the desk where the employees were. There was also an exit door that led out to the back of the building. After entering the back room, I did not see the guy anywhere. I was confused at first, and I called out asking if anybody was there. After getting no response, I figured that the guy must have left out the back door. That made me worried that he might have stole some stuff. I looked around and did not see anything that was obviously stolen from the back though, so I went back out into the store and was going to try to find out if anything was stolen there. I found another employee, and I told my coworker Jeff about what had happened. He told me that I should go into the back room and check to make sure nothing was stolen, and he would make sure nothing was stolen from the sales floor. So I started to make my way over there, and that's when I saw the back door opening again. The same man started to walk out, but then he noticed me and he went back in the room and closed the door. I walked as fast as I could through the crowd to get back over to the room again. I was able to make it within about a minute and get inside, but when I did, once more I didn't see the guy in there. I called out again and once more got no response. I could not figure out where this guy was hiding or if he had left the store. I started to look around and check if anything was stolen. I went to the far end of the narrow back room and began looking at the items there. As I was doing so, I suddenly felt that somebody was behind me. I turned around to see the man standing there, now slowly walking towards me. I had no idea where he came from. He was a big guy, larger than me, and his face was nearly expressionless. I was concerned and did not know what he wanted. Seeing him back there totally took me by surprise. After a few moments, the only words I could get out were, "What are you doing back here?" He did not say anything, but kept walking towards me. Just then, the other door to the back opened, the one that led from behind the counter. My coworker Jeff was there, and he called out telling the man that he could not be in the back room. The man saw him, stopped for a moment, and then bolted for the back door. He ran out and left the building completely. I was glad that he was finally gone. He also did not appear to have stolen anything. We went over and checked, and nothing was missing. We also realized that the man must have been hiding behind some boxes that were back there. I had never looked in that particular area. I really don't know what that man's intentions were, but it was very creepy to say the least. Last Thanksgiving, my family decided to spend the holiday at our cabin for a change. The drive was longer than usual because of the snowfall, but we didn't mind because the radar had predicted light snowfall for the next day or two. We arrived at the cabin just as night fell. My parents prepared dinner while my siblings and I helped to get the place ready. We lit candles and pulled out the board games to play for the night because we didn't have any TVs there. As we sat down for dinner, the wind began to howl outside. It quickly turned into a snowstorm that we had not been expecting. By the time we finished eating, snow was piling up against the windows. Over the course of the next day, the storm stayed persistent and might have even gotten worse, so we weren't able to drive home the next morning and had to stay another night at the cabin. The second night, the power ended up going out as well. Later that night, after everybody had gone to bed, I began to hear noises. It was no longer just the storm, however. I began hearing other sounds mixed in, such as thuds and scraping noises. I laid in my sleeping bag and tried to fall back asleep, hoping that it was nothing unusual. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed from the back of the cabin. I glanced over at my parents, who were both still asleep, so I decided to get up and check. As I crept to the back door, I noticed that the snow had drifted against the windows. I looked out, and for a moment, I saw nothing but white. I kept looking though, and saw some movement through the snow.
Approaching the door, I saw a figure who was carrying a log or a big piece of something else. I ran upstairs to wake my parents, and as I got to their room, an even louder banging and pounding on the door began. The louder bangs had already woken them up, thankfully. My dad grabbed a flashlight and a crowbar, while my mom called the police. We huddled together out of sight from the door, waiting for the police to arrive. The loud banging and scraping continued, as whoever was out there attempted to break into our cabin. The door by the lock area actually started to splinter a little as the person kept banging on it with their piece of wood. The police pulled into our driveway just in time though, and the man bolted into the woods. The officers didn't even bother trying to chase after the guy in the woods because of the snowstorm. The storm finally let up early the next morning so that we could get out of there and go home. Looking at both sides of the lock and the door in the daylight the next morning, it was a miracle it even held up. It was a good thing the police were able to make good progress through the snowstorm, because I'm not sure how much longer the door would have lasted. Also, we discovered that our power had been purposely cut, something which we had just thought happened as a result of the storm. My family had no idea who the intruder could have been, and we ended up selling the cabin soon after the incident just in case. This happened back in 2007. My husband and I were planning on going Black Friday shopping that year. We had a normal Thanksgiving, but then we got up really early the next morning at 4:30 a.m. There were a few things that I was interested in getting, and I had read the advertisements and saw that there were a lot of good deals. We were going to several different stores, but we would be starting at Walmart. We got there a little bit after 5 o'clock in the morning, and it was insanely busy. Firstly, the only available parking spaces were at the far back of the parking lot. Then, when we got inside of the store, it was the busiest that I had ever seen a store in my entire life. You could hardly walk anywhere at all because there were so many people around. My husband and I started to make our way through the store, but it was impossible to walk anywhere without people bumping into you left and right. Within probably 5 minutes of being inside, we were not even halfway to the back of the store yet, and around then, I ended up getting separated from my husband. The mob of people basically swallowed us both, forcing us into different directions. I tried looking around for my husband, but I couldn't figure out which direction he was in. For a little while, I tried going forward, but did not have any luck. I decided at that point to leave the store and try to call my husband on my cell phone. I was much closer to the doors to exit anyways, so I turned around and started going against the grain. I slowly walked through the mob of people, and within several minutes was able to find the doors. Then I got outside of the Walmart, but there were still a bunch of people constantly coming and going from the entrance doors, so I figured that I would go back to the car and call my husband there. I walked all the way to the back end of the parking lot and reached our vehicle, but I then realized that I did not have the keys. My husband had them, and obviously the car was locked. So instead, I just stood by it, where it was finally quiet and not filled with people. I could actually hear myself think, and I took out my cell phone. I saw that my husband had tried to call me. I must not have heard it ringing or felt it vibrating because of being stuck in the large mob of people. So I tried to call him back, but he did not answer. He probably was stuck inside the mob and didn't even notice the call. I figured that he would think to come out of the store like I had, so I decided to wait by our car. It was cool and comfortable outside, and refreshing compared to inside of the crazy mob of Walmart. After being out there just standing around by the car for maybe 5 minutes, I remember I heard a vehicle nearby. I looked over and saw one of those old white Astro vans from the 1990s. It was in rough shape, and the engine was running rather loud. The van slowly made its way from the far back end of the parking lot over to the row of cars that we were parked in. The van started to drive past me very slowly, but then it stopped. I remember that the window then rolled down, and I saw a man with a goatee and a baseball cap was driving it. He said hi to me, and then asked me if I needed a ride. I was already kind of creeped out by him, and I said no thanks. I expected the man to drive away, but he didn't. Instead, the man said, "No, I think you need a ride. Hop in." I said, "No thanks, I'm really good." The man asked me what I was doing out there all alone. At that point, I decided to just go back inside of the Walmart. As crazy of a scene as it was in there, I guess it wasn't that much better out in the parking lot. So I just turned and started walking back for the store. As I walked, the van slowly but loudly started keeping pace with me. The man called out to me several more times, telling me that I should get inside of his car. I just ignored him. Soon, I made it to the front doors, where some other people were around, and I felt better. I remember that the man then turned in his van though, and started to park it along the front side of Walmart by the curb. This was definitely not a parking space. As he parked anyways though, I headed for the doors, but looked back one more time to see the man now getting out of his vehicle. This made me go faster. Soon, I rejoined the crazy mob of people, and I was once again brushing shoulders with tons of other shoppers, just trying to make it in. But then, I happened to see my husband walking towards me from the other direction. I cut in front of a few people to try to get over to him. It was difficult, but soon we were able to make it back to each other. He was trying to leave the store and go outside. After I found him, we both went towards the exits. Within a couple of minutes, we were able to make it back. Then we left Walmart. When we did, I saw the van still parked out front, but nobody appeared to be inside of it, so the man must have been in the store. I told my husband about the creepy experience with the guy, and we decided to just leave and go to another store instead. I did not see that creepy guy or his van again after that, and I'm not sure if he went inside a Walmart just to go after me or not, but it sure seemed like it. That was one of the craziest Black Fridays that I've ever experienced. A few years ago, my wife and I were going to my parents' house for Thanksgiving. It is a tradition to go there, and my parents have a decent-sized house only about 10 or 15 minutes away from ours. Most of the way to get there is through mostly quiet and windy roads. I remember that we left in the late morning, and it was a very nice and sunny day. As we drove through the quiet roads, we were looking forward to seeing all the people that would be there. Aside from my parents, there would be lots of other extended family. However, when we had made it to within just a few minutes of my parents' place and were just outside of their neighborhood, something strange happened. We were driving past this dense wooded area to the right of the road. As we did, we saw up ahead this man seemingly come out of the woods and then walk out onto the road. He then stopped and was facing us, just standing there. The man appeared to be younger and was wearing a sweatshirt and jeans and had slightly longer hair. He also had a patchy-looking beard. It was a strange thing to see, and I had to slow down significantly after noticing him. My wife and I were wondering what he was doing. I came to a near stop, and that's when the man waved at me and then started walking over towards my driver's window. I remember that before I even rolled the window down or stopped completely, my wife saying not to let him in whatever he says because he looks sketchy. So the man was clearly trying to get my attention, and I stopped and I rolled down the window, wondering what he wanted. He said hi to us at first, and then asked us if we could give him a ride. He claimed that he just wanted to get to the gas station. There was one that was a little ways back down the road in the opposite direction. We weren't going that way though, and the guy did seem sketchy. I told him no, I couldn't do that. The man pleaded with me, saying that it was not very far, but I still said no. I did, however, ask if he had a phone, or if he wanted me to call somebody for him, but he declined. So at that point, with the man still standing there next to my driver's window, I started to drive away. I wondered what exactly he was doing. So we continued with the rest of the drive to my parents' house, which didn't take that much longer at all. After arriving, we went inside and started talking and hanging out with everyone. I remember asking a few people that got there after us if the man had stopped them in the road too, or if they had seen him. Nobody else said that they saw him though. As Thanksgiving went on, at one point, I was standing near the front side of the living room in my parents' house. I happened to notice out the window that a man was walking down the street, and it looked a lot like the same guy that we had seen earlier. He was walking very slowly, just kind of looking around like he was lost. But eventually, he made his way down the street and out of my sight, and I soon forgot about him. But later on, in the evening when it was now dark out, I remember hearing a knock at the door. People were wondering who it was, because everybody was already there who had been invited. Someone else walked over to the door and looked, but did not open it. I remember hearing that some random guy was standing there. My parents got called over, asking if they knew him, and I walked over as well, remembering the man I had seen earlier. When we all got to the window, it was sure enough the same man. I told him not to answer the door, saying that it was the sketchy guy who had asked me for a ride earlier. The man stood there at the doorstep for a few moments before turning to walk away, but he did not walk back towards the street. Instead, it looked as though he was starting to make his way to the back of the house. At that point, one of my uncles opened up the front door slightly and yelled at the guy, asking what he was doing. The man then stopped, turned around, and ran away back out into the street and quickly out of our sight, and for the rest of the night, we didn't see him at all. I really don't know who the guy was or what he was up to, but it was very sketchy indeed. Back in the year 2000, I worked at a GameStop for a while. This was a really fun time in video games because the PlayStation 2 came out earlier that year. I remember buying one and also the lines of people to get them that day. So when Black Friday rolled around later on in the year, we figured that it would be a similar situation. The PS2 was still a hot seller, and it was going on sale as well as many other games. At our store, it was part of a small strip mall, and we would only allow a certain number of people to be shopping at once. So somebody would stand out by the door and let people in when other customers left. Otherwise, the small store would be so crowded and it would be a risk of shoplifting and things like that. I don't remember exactly when we opened that morning, but I know that it was pretty early and still dark out at the time. I was working with 4 other coworkers that morning, and I got there about 30 minutes before we opened. I was assigned to be the person who would stand outside and keep the line in order, as well as make sure that the store didn't get too busy. I didn't really want to do that, but I guess it wasn't that difficult either. So a little bit before open time, I went out there, and there was already a decent line of people outside. I announced to everybody that we were only letting a certain amount of people in at a time. Then we opened, and the doors were unlocked, and people started filing in. For the first hour or so, things went pretty well. The line was organized and went smoothly. At one point, though, there was an interesting-looking guy that got in line. I noticed him when he was maybe 10 people from the front. He was a somewhat tall and thin man, wearing a rather odd and creepy mask completely covering his head. It was obviously not Halloween, so I didn't know why he was wearing it. He looked kind of creepy, but it was probably just a joke. When I was letting more people in the store, the guy got closer to the front of the line. That's when I realized that he did not appear to be with anybody else, but by himself. This added to the strangeness of it, and when I was letting more people in, he didn't go. I remember that it was his turn, and he just stood there holding up the line. I told him that he could go in, but he didn't move. He just ignored me, and after a while, he moved to the side a little, and some people behind him started to go in front of him. Then he just kept standing there. More people walked past him, and he stayed in the same spot for like 30 more minutes to an hour. Soon, things quieted down enough that I no longer had to be outside. There was no longer a line of people outside the store, just this one guy standing there. I let everybody who was going to the store in right away, but the masked man did not enter. He just kept standing in the same spot, sort of looking at me and sort of looking towards the store. I didn't know what his deal was. I tried asking him, but he just ignored me. So then I was able to go back inside of the store and work in there for the rest of the time, helping customers. I had pretty much forgotten about the guy after a while of being inside. But then, several hours later, I saw him standing outside and looking into the window. He did not enter the store though. I wondered what on earth he was still doing here. But for the rest of my shift at work that day, I didn't see him after that. Sometime in the early afternoon, I got off of work. I left the store and walked out to my car in the parking lot. When I got to my car, I noticed off in the distance the same guy hiding in the bushes. He was looking right at me. It was very strange. I just got inside of my car, started the engine, and left. After that, I never saw him again. I don't know who the guy was or what he was doing. If that was some kind of a prank, he really went all out, acting very creepy, as well as being there for like 6 hours. It was on Black Friday 4 years ago. It was in the middle of all the crowded Black Friday shopping going on. I had gone to Best Buy to look at computers. I was intending on buying a new laptop and possibly a desktop computer as well. They were probably the most popular thing that was going on sale there that day, so I got there a couple of hours early and waited in line. There was quite a few other people waiting, so I brought a chair and some hand warmers and just watched videos and played games on my phone as I waited. I remember there was a guy standing behind me who had short blonde hair, and he was just standing there facing me but not really looking at me the entire time. At one point, I asked him how he was doing, but he didn't answer me. He didn't even look at me at all. The more time went by, it seemed awkward and just really strange as well. At last, finally, the doors to Best Buy were open and all the people rushed inside. I went to the computers and got the laptop I had been planning on getting. I ended up getting the desktop computer as well. I was there for maybe 30 minutes, and then I left and brought the things to my car. I put them in the front passenger seat and then went around and got into the car. But as soon as I sat down and started the engine, I looked in my mirror and saw the man who had been standing behind me in line. He was sitting in the back seat of my car. I freaked out and immediately jumped out of the car and ran all the way back inside to Best Buy. I got out my phone and called the police. Once I regained my composure, I went back out into the parking lot, but my car was gone. I realized I had left the keys in it. The police arrived a short time later. We figured the guy was probably planning to rob me, so I guess he got my stuff. I was just lucky to be okay. But the next day, I got a call saying my car had been found abandoned about 10 miles away, and both of my computers were still inside. I went shopping with my friend Jessica on Black Friday last year. I first went over to her house at around 7 a.m., and then we took her car and went to several stores. We live in a pretty busy area, and there are a lot of places to shop nearby. So when we drove to the first store, there were lots of other people there shopping. Overall, it was not too crazy though. There were no specific things that we desperately needed to get, but I wanted to get a start on my Christmas shopping. After going to several different stores, later on we both were at this one clothing store. This one was the busiest one yet, and it was a larger store. I remember that we both found a few things to get, but there was a really long line to check out. We got in the line anyways, and not long after us, this man got in line right behind. He looked sort of mysterious and kind of stood out right away. He was wearing sunglasses and a long black jacket. He also wore a black winter hat. The man just stood there, staring straight ahead. I was talking with Jessica, who was standing next to me the whole time, so I would see the man out of the corner of my vision. I soon realized that he didn't seem to have any items in his hands to buy at all either. For the most part though, I just ignored him. We ended up waiting in line for probably close to 30 minutes. The line slowly moved up until it was finally our turn to check out. After we did, we left the store. Jessica and I needed to go to another store after that, and we were there for a while. Then we were finally done shopping and went back. We went to Jessica's house, and I hung out there with her for a while before going back to my place. When I got home, it was sometime in the late afternoon to early evening. I live in a pretty typical neighborhood for the most part, and a pretty average house. I just remember that at like 10 o'clock at night, there was a knocking on my front door. I got up and walked over to the front window. I wanted to look outside before answering it, because a 10 p.m. knock on the door is a little bit unusual. When I looked, I could not believe my eyes. It was the same man who had been in line behind us at the store. He was still wearing the same exact thing, with the hat and sunglasses and everything. Obviously, I had no idea what he wanted, but I didn't want to find out either. I watched the man just stand there for a while. Then he knocked on the door again. I still didn't answer it. He then stood there for a really long time. He was probably there for at least 5 minutes. Then, finally, he walked away. I saw him go down the street and then out of my sight. A short time after that, a car drove past, which I'm guessing was his. I really don't know why the guy showed up at my house, or how he even knew where I lived. It made me wonder, though, if he had been following me all day or something. If he had been, I certainly didn't notice, and I'm hoping that I don't see him again. My first semester of college as a freshman, I ended up spending Thanksgiving alone in my college dorm room. I was an international student and couldn't afford to go home for such a short break. In my first semester, I hadn't made any notable friends yet, at least the kind that would invite me to their family's Thanksgiving, so I was alone for the weekend. The campus was empty as most people had gone home, and the silence in my room felt heavier as the holiday approached. Thanksgiving night, I was really bored. I considered ordering takeout, but I had been alone in my room all day, so I wanted to get out for a bit. There was a small Chinese restaurant a few blocks from campus that I had been meaning to try, and it was one of the few places open for the holiday. I took a short walk through the cold and snow. The food was good, and I'm glad I decided to eat there since I could take some extra time to hang out in my booth and just be out of my dorm room. While I was at the restaurant, I was on my phone for a good chunk after I had finished eating, and I didn't notice much going on around me. However, after leaving and starting my walk back to my dorm, I found out someone seemed to be following me. I don't know if they were in the restaurant with me or just from the street outside, but I was scared and walked as fast as I could without actually running to get back to my dorm. When I got there, I sprinted up the stairs to my dorm room, fumbled with my key card, and was able to slam the door shut before the guy could get into the building. The man stood in the foyer of the building, pretending like he was only there to get warm. I had made it back though, and I felt safe, especially after going to my room and locking the door. Hours passed as I studied and watched stuff on my laptop, but around midnight, I heard my doorknob jiggle in an attempt to open, and then there was a knock at my door. I checked through the peephole and saw the same man who had been following me from before. He must have found a way into the building, but there was no way to know which door was mine. I even took all my name tags off my door. I just pretended like I wasn't inside, and eventually he went away. As soon as I left, I called campus security, alerting them that I thought the guy wasn't supposed to be in there. A bit later, I heard a commotion down the hall from my room, and I had to step out and see what was going on. 2 campus security officers had wrestled the same guy from before down to the ground outside of a student's door. There was also a student who appeared to be okay for the most part, with some blood coming from somewhere on their face. After they detained the man, I ended up getting the full story from one of the officers who had now arrived. Apparently, the man had been going around trying all the doors to see if any were open and knocking to see if somebody would open up. He ended up finding another student's door open and proceeded to enter and began physically assaulting the kid, but campus security was able to detain him before it got too out of hand. I'm just glad that I had decided to notify campus security about the man and that I locked my door also. Definitely not how I expected my Thanksgiving night alone in the dorms to go. This happened to a friend and I on Thanksgiving night 5 years ago. I was a junior in high school, and I was spending Thanksgiving night at my friend Alex's house. We had been friends since middle school and took many walks around town at night. And that's what we did late Thanksgiving night this year after dinner and watching the NFL game. Our town was a pretty good size of about 15,000 people, and it had a low crime rate. Nothing major ever really happened in our town, so we felt safe, even at 11:30 p.m. That night, we strolled through Alex's neighborhood, which was familiar territory for us. We walked down the main street, which was our usual route. As we continued on the main street in town, a car passed us. I didn't pay much attention to it until it turned around at the end of the street. I'm glad one of us had looked behind shortly after, because we noticed that the car had stopped on the side of the road. I exchanged a glance with Alex, both of us instinctively tensing up, because nobody got out of the car, and the car just sat there with its engine running. We kept walking, a little more nervous now about why the car just randomly stopped there. It wasn't in front of a house or anything. After a bit, the car suddenly started moving again, but this time it was speeding in reverse towards us. We both started to panic and jumped into the woods to our left, which wasn't that big of a forest, but it was pretty thick in there. We had run only about 15 feet into the thick woods by the time the car had gotten to our location, so we stopped moving and looked back through the branches and leaves to watch and stay quiet. The passenger side door of the car swung open, and a man stepped out. I didn't get a good look at him because once again it was really thick woods and there were tons of branches and leaves in the way. In the dim light though, I could see that he hesitated and scanned the woods from the sidewalk, perhaps searching for us. For a moment, he seemed to consider chasing us, but then he turned and got back into the car. The car eventually backed out of the area and drove away. We waited in the woods just a little longer, but since there weren't many cars out on the road, we were nervous about seeing that one again. We snuck back towards Alex's house, trying to stay off the main road as much as we possibly could by cutting through some people's backyards. I have no idea if the intention of the people in that car was a prank, a mugging, or a kidnapping, but I'm glad that we were cautious anyways, and we ran into the woods as soon as we saw the car coming towards us in reverse. After that night, we still continued our walks, but we both carried small knives on us after that just in case.
Back when I was younger, we used to go to my aunt and uncle's house for Thanksgiving every year. When I was about 14 or so, I remember that on Thanksgiving my family and I went there as usual. We would get there sometime in the early afternoon, and a bunch of other family members would be there as well. Their house was about 20 minutes from our house and a little bit out in the country. They had a really large property, and the neighborhood was very quiet, with the houses being more spread out. At their house, they also had this dog that I really liked. I didn't have any pets of my own at the time, so I remember that a few hours after getting there, people were hanging out and talking all around the house. I saw that the dog was near the front door, indicating that he wanted to go outside. I went over to my uncle and offered to take the dog out, and he agreed. My uncle told me that the dog had an electric fence along the edge of the property because he had a tendency to want to run around a lot. Sometimes he would chase squirrels or whatever and run out of the yard. So because of this, I took the leash and then left the house with the dog. We walked sort of down the long driveway they had and into the front yard a little bit. From there, you couldn't even see the next door neighbor's house because it was farther away, plus there was a small woods in between. The dog did its business and then was sniffing around on the ground when I saw a man walking down the street. It was strange to see somebody walking because the neighborhood was always so quiet and there were no sidewalks. It was a shorter, stocky man with a goatee wearing a blue jacket. He saw me and started to walk up the long driveway. I walked over to him with the dog still, and the man said hi. He then asked me if I was visiting for Thanksgiving, and I said yes. The man said that he lived right next door and pointed to the property to the right, except the only thing I could see were the trees when he pointed over there. He then said that he had recently borrowed a wheelbarrow and some tools from my uncle, and asked me if I could do him a favor and go get them. I asked him where they were, and he said they were in his garage. I said yes at first, but then realized that would require 2 hands to get a wheelbarrow, and I was still walking the dog. I told the man that I was just going to take the dog back inside quick, and then I could do it. But the man said no. He offered to take the dog from me while we went over. I realized that wouldn't work though because of the electric fence, and I didn't want to just let the dog run around the yard. So I said I would just be right back, and then I walked away up the driveway. Then I went back inside with the dog and saw my uncle standing talking to someone not that far away. I figured that I would tell him about the neighbor before I went back out. When I told my uncle though, he looked confused and asked me which neighbor. I pointed to the direction, and my uncle said that those neighbors were out of town for Thanksgiving. He also told me that he hadn't lent a wheelbarrow or tools to anyone. He then asked me to describe the man, and my uncle said that he didn't know of anyone who lived nearby matching that description when I did. And it certainly was not the homeowner of the house next door. My uncle was now very curious and decided to go outside and see the man. I went back outside with him, but when we got out there, the man was gone. We walked to the end of the driveway and out into the street. The street was completely quiet and empty though. We then walked down the street to the direction of the house which the guy had pointed to. My uncle said that a husband and wife lived there, and they told him that they were leaving for a week. When we arrived at their driveway, we actually walked up it. This driveway was also very long, but we noticed that the garage door was wide open. My uncle walked up to it and called out, asking if anybody was there. However, there was no response, but he came back soon, saying that some of the things appeared to be messed up. I guess my uncle knew most of the neighbors pretty well, and he knew that the guy who actually did live there kept things pretty neat. We walked back over to my uncle's house, and then he called the police. When they came out, they found that the garage door had been pried open, and some things were messed up, but nobody was located. We didn't see that guy for the rest of the night. Looking back, I'm really glad that I didn't go with the guy. I have no idea what could have happened. I'm glad that I told my uncle when I did, and I hope that man was eventually located. I used to work at a Target store. One time, I had to work during Black Friday. I knew that it would be really busy at the store, and I was prepared for there to be lots of people. I worked out in the parking lot pushing carts most of the time. We opened up on Thanksgiving, so I was there from the start. Fortunately, we had lots of people working that night, so for me it wasn't too bad. I was mostly just going around the parking lot and getting carts that people did not put in the places they were supposed to. A lot of carts were left in random parking spaces or near a curb, so I was getting those a lot. There was another person out working with me getting the carts, so it was nice to have help, and I wasn't really in a rush. But I remember that when it got later, at probably around 11 p.m.,
Things were still really busy. I was walking near one of the far back corners of the parking lot, collecting a stray cart that was over there. When I did, I happened to notice a guy really far away pushing a cart around the side of the Target building. This was strange because there were no parking spaces on that side of the store. I wasn't sure where he was going with it, so as I brought in the cart that I had just got, I kept an eye on him. The man just kept on going down the building. So I put the cart that I had in a cart rack, and then I walked to the side of the building myself. I wanted to see where the guy was going, and when I got to the side of the building, I just barely saw him pushing the cart still, going completely behind the Target store. So I kept going, and I was planning on asking the guy where he was going with that cart. I could not tell if anything was in the cart or not, but it didn't appear so. But I also knew that there were no parking spaces behind the building either. Behind our Target, there was a small and quiet access road that was only used for truck deliveries. Then there was a grass area with several pine trees, and on the other side of that was another quiet road. So when I finally got around to the back of the building, at first I couldn't tell where the man had gone. I didn't really see anything. But then I heard some talking coming from just inside the grass. I walked down the paved area and then went up into the grass. There were several trees in the area, and I could tell they were behind them. It made it almost a wooded area, but within the trees was a clearing. When I got inside of that clearing, I saw 2 pickup trucks, about 5 or 6 men standing around, and 2 Target shopping carts. Another guy had a cart as well. I had no idea what was going on. They all stopped and looked at me. One of the guys finally spoke and called me over. I just had a bad feeling about it. I just said, "What are you guys doing?" The guy told me to come over to them again. For some reason, I was terrified and I just started walking away. I didn't even ask for the carts back. When I turned, I heard one of the guys start to walk after me. At that point, I just sprinted away, running as fast as I could. I was able to make it back around the Target, and I went inside the store for a while. When I was in there, I saw one of our security guards, and I decided to tell him about the situation. He asked me to show him where the guys were, so we both went back there, but when we did, they were gone. The security guard was not exactly sure what had been going on there either. After that, we both went back to the front of the store, and he went inside. I worked outside mostly for the next hour or so, but I remember that when I was getting a few carts from deep in the parking lot, I noticed something. One of the same trucks that I had seen parked behind the Target in the grass was now parked out front. It was just to the left of the right side entrance doors. I know there are a lot of pickup trucks out there, but this one I could just tell was the same. It was the same color, make, and model, and I just knew it. As I walked closer to the store with the carts, I suddenly saw 2 men come sprinting out of the Target store. They were holding several items in their hands, no doubt shoplifting. They both ran to the pickup truck, quickly got inside, and the truck then screeched off, squealing the tires as it left. Soon after, I saw the Target security guard come running out of the store. I caught up with him and talked to him about what happened. He said he was going to go back and look at the security footage. Obviously, Black Friday weekend was very busy for the security guys. That was a crazy thing to happen. I think I may have found those guys planning their shoplifting adventures or something, but I'm really not sure exactly what it was. My name is Ashley, and this is something that happened way back in 2003. That year, at Thanksgiving, I decided I was going to get up early and do some Black Friday shopping the next day. I looked at some advertisements, and there were some really good deals. I also got some ideas for gifts for family members as well. During this time, I was 20 years old and back from college for the time. I asked my parents if they wanted to go shopping with me in the morning, but they already had plans. So the next day, at like 6 a.m., I got up and went to the nearby shopping center. I first went to Best Buy and then Walmart and Target, and I got a few things. Each of those stores were very busy, as you would expect on Black Friday. My 4th stop of the day was Circuit City. By now, it was not quite as crazy as before, but it was still extremely busy with lots of people there. I remember that I went inside and I started looking around at stuff. Not long after, this employee guy came up to me. I remember that his name was Todd, and he asked me if I needed help with anything. I told him something like, "No thanks, I was just looking." But this Todd guy seemed to follow me around. He started making conversation with me, asking how I was doing and stuff. I was wondering why he was spending so much time talking to me when there were so many other customers around,
but he didn't really say anything that strange or ask me anything that personal, so I just figured that he was a friendly guy. He appeared to be in his mid to late 20s if I had to guess. So eventually he sort of left me alone, and I walked around the store and found a few things to buy. But then Todd found me again. He asked me if I was ready to check out, and I said yes. I remember that he then opened a register and scanned my items, and I paid. During the checkout, he asked me for my address, saying that it was for the protection plan of one of the items I was buying, and I gave it to him. After that, I left the Circuit City store and headed home. I got back and hung out around the house with my family for the rest of the day. However, I remember that I was watching a movie with my parents that night, and there was a knock at the door. By now, it was like 9 p.m., so this was a little bit strange. My dad got up to go and see who was there, but I was curious, so I went over and looked out the window. When I did, I saw Todd from Circuit City. I couldn't believe that he was at my house. My dad answered the door, but as soon as it opened, Todd turned around and started walking off. I remember my dad asking him who he was and what he was doing, but Todd pretty much just ran away and didn't answer any of his questions. I told my parents about what happened at Circuit City. We all agreed that Todd was a bit of a creep for that. I figured that I wouldn't see him again though, but I was wrong. A while later, we all went to bed. The lights in the house went off, and I went to my bedroom. I was tired from being up so early, and I fell asleep rather fast, but I awoke not too much long after that. At first, I was not sure what had woken me up. I didn't hear anything, and I looked around the room and saw nothing. But then, I noticed my bedroom window. Todd was standing right outside of it and looking in. I quickly got up, and without hesitation, I ran out of the room. I went to the phone in the kitchen, and I called the police. I told them about what happened, and after that, I woke my parents. We waited inside, and when the police got there, Todd was gone. However, after telling them what I knew about him, such as that he worked at Circuit City, it was not a big mystery as to who it was. I heard that Todd ended up getting fired from Circuit City. Luckily, after that, I never saw him again. I have a really crazy experience that happened a few years ago on Black Friday. I'm a female and in my mid-20s. At this particular time, I went with my best friend Stephanie to go Black Friday shopping. We live not too far away from a really large mall, and on Black Friday, it's a fun place to be. Sure, there are quite a few other people shopping there as well, but that doesn't bother me. We also have a friend named Jack who we went to school with, and he was working at one of the stores in the mall, so Stephanie and I wanted to say hi to him at some point. We arrived at the mall early in the morning and started shopping. As you would guess, it was very crowded. We got a few things, and then we went to the store that Jack was working at and said hi to him, and his store was also very busy like the rest of them. After leaving the store, we were making our way towards the other end of the mall when I got a text message. I remember that I took out my phone and I saw that it was from a number I did not recognize. The text was telling me to come back to the store. I realized that this had to be Jack, except I already had his number in my phone. He was in my contacts, and I had him under his name, so I didn't know why this would show up as just a number and not Jack. I asked who it was by texting just to be sure. He texted back saying Jack. I showed the text to Stephanie, and we then went back to Jack's store to see him. After arriving there, he said hi again, and that he was surprised to see us so soon. I told him how he had texted me, and he said that he did not text me. I showed him the text, and he said it wasn't him. He even showed me his phone, and he had not in fact texted me, and that was also not in fact his number. It was really strange. I looked around, wondering if somebody else in the store was behind the text messages. It was packed in there. I had really no way of knowing who it could have been. After that, Stephanie and I left the store once again, and we walked back out to where we had been going before the text. A while later, we went to the food court and were sitting at a table and eating. It was very busy there as well. When we were there though, I got another text on the phone from the same number. I looked at it, and this time the text said that I looked cute. I was creeped out, and I looked around again. However, anybody could have been sending these texts. There were hundreds of people within my sight. Stephanie and I were not really sure what to do. I texted the number back asking who it was, but they did not answer me. Instead, about 5 minutes later, while we were still sitting there, they sent another text. This one was a picture though. I looked at it, and it was of me, taken probably just seconds prior, and it was really zoomed in.
I looked at it for a while, and then I looked around for the direction that the photo was taken from. After scanning around the food court, I finally saw it. There was a man standing pretty far away from us near the edge of the food court to my left, and he was just staring at me. He had this creepy grin on his face, and when Stephanie saw him, she was also creeped out. We decided to just get up and leave the mall. After standing though, I saw the man start to walk in our direction. He was still a long ways away though. We both got to moving, and we walked very quickly to the opposite way where the man was. There was enough people around that we were pretty much able to get a good distance away from him. We quickly took an escalator down to the lower level, and then we found the way to the parking garage that we had parked in. I kept looking back over my shoulder, but I never saw the guy. We were able to leave and get home after that, and I blocked the guy's number as well. I'm not sure how he got my number in the first place. I haven't seen him since though. We reported him to the mall, and hopefully he was either found and banned or will not do anything like that again.